Chapter 204. Because of Silen's actions, the project made great progress. This huge hemispherical machine was like a flower bud that took a small step forward. However, this small step was enough for everyone to see the general direction. To be able to become an academician of the League of Stars Research Institute, one's eyesight must be quite good. After the big machine moved, several old academicians quickly formulated the next steps based on the information collected before. The old academicians didn't have the time to stop Silen's actions just now. Although it was a significant step, the project was just too important. They had no choice but to be as cautious as they could be, and they wouldn't allow Silen to do whatever he wanted from now on. Under the guidance of several authoritative figures, each of the direct disciples had the intention of showing off their skills to gain face for their masters, trying their best to show off their most powerful side. The old academicians who were supervising the work nodded at the performance of their disciples. They all thought that their disciples were the best. Every engineering technician had their own assigned tasks. Everyone's assigned area was recorded, and there was a special monitor monitoring it not far away. Every area would be inspected again. If there was a problem, they could directly find the person in charge of that area. Even though the disciples were the ones who did the work, the main responsibility was still on the masters. This was because the masters would personally inspect the work after it was completed. The military wouldn't admit fault because their own equipment didn't detect any problems. They would still look for authoritative figures to take responsibility. This was something that Mo Heng didn't like. As the old academicians were talking, Silen slowly walked over. Mo Heng glanced at him and grinned. He tried to make himself look more serious. "It's done." Silen showed an honest smile. "It's done. Master, do you want to inspect it?" "Ahem, of course I have to inspect it. Don't cut corners by finishing it so quickly. If there's a problem, I won't forgive you." Mo Heng's words sounded harsh, but who in the room could not hear the smugness in his voice? As the first person to complete the work and Mo Heng's precious disciple, the old academicians were tired anyway. It was a good time to see what Mo Heng's disciple was capable of. Mo Heng didn't stop them. Instead, he was quite happy. He put his hands behind his back and walked over without Silen's help. The old academicians behind him curled their lips. Look at how cocky he is. When they arrived at the area that Silen was in charge of, the old academicians could tell that it was definitely the work of an extremely professional. It could be said to be perfect. Even the old academicians couldn't guarantee that they could do a better job than the interface of the parts, the connection of the wires, and the placement of the small instruments. In fact, Silen had already finished his work a long time ago. He had even studied the entire machine, but because he had only done the preliminary work, there was a limit to what he could study. After a while, he got bored and stood up to report to Mo Heng. He wondered what the other academicians would think if they knew the truth. He took the military equipment and inspected it. It was indeed of excellent quality. This time, Mo Heng's tail, which had been raised high up in the air, was about to reach the sky. Seeing that the old academicians had been silent all this time, and that he couldn't find any fault to scold, Mo Heng grinned and waved his hands. He pretended to be disgusted and said, all right. Don't think that you'll be fine just because you've completed the project. When we get back, massage this old man's legs and test your recent homework." "Recent homework? What the hell is there to do recently?" Silen rolled his eyes on the inside, but Silen was well aware of Mo Heng's desire to show off. After Mo Heng lay down on the recliner, he obediently massaged Mo Heng's legs. Aging was first manifested in one's feet and legs. Among people of the same age and gene rank, some would walk as if they were flying, while others would stagger. That was the difference. Moreover, the legs and knee joints had to bear the weight of the entire body. Over time, they would wear out and seriously affect the movement of the joints. As one grew older, the wear and tear would become more and more serious. Even someone like Mo Heng, who was once famous when he was young, had no choice but to accept his old age. His occupational disease was very obvious. His hands were fine when he worked selflessly, but the damage to his legs was more severe. His frequent menstrual cramps had also gradually shrunk. Back at Seven Lights, Silen would massage Mo Heng's legs from time to time. Until now, Mo Heng still felt that the healthcare machine's effect was inferior to Silen's massage. Sigh, my legs feel much more comfortable after every massage. My blood vessels are unblocked, and the soreness and weakness in my legs are greatly reduced. Mo Heng sighed. The few old academicians who had just returned to their seats pretended not to hear anything. Show off all you want. I'll pretend I didn't hear anything. It was only after Silen massaged Mo Heng's legs for a long time that the people on the other side finally finished their work. Because of the importance of this project, many people would rather slow down in order to make every step perfect. But the old academicians had to admit that there was still a gap between their engineering quality and Silen's even if they did so. In truth, they had already performed very well and exceeded their usual standards. But with Silen as a comparison, they were not as eye-catching. Although the gap was there, the overall engineering quality of this step was still excellent. Are you ready? Yes. Someone on the other side made a gesture. Alright, start the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Connect. Following the old academician's order, this step of the project began. The energy was connected, and the engineering areas began to come into play. The huge hemispherical shape that opened a little at the top began to change. This big, flower bud, bloomed into a big arc, and its appearance also changed, revealing some control surfaces that everyone was very familiar with. Everything was difficult at the beginning. The most difficult part had been completed, and the rest of the project would be easier. There was no need for these people to fully invest in it. The things to pay attention to in the early stage and some of the working principles of this big machine had been annotated, so the people inside the military should be able to handle it after taking over. Originally, someone in the military wanted Mo Heng to participate in the later stages of the project, but Mo Heng refused. This time, he did not want to get involved in the internal affairs of the military. If he caused trouble, it would also affect Mo Qing. Mo Heng had a deep understanding of the problem and was quite decisive. He would immediately cut off what needed to be cut off. After working for half a day, Mo Heng was also tired. Although he wanted to talk to Silen for a while, for the sake of Mo Heng's health, Silen refused and let Mo Heng rest. After being invited to this planet to do the project, Mo Heng had not had a good rest. When he was young, he could work hard, but when he was old, he could not. After Silen repeatedly promised that he wouldn't disappear for no reason this time, Mo Heng finally showed mercy and let Silen leave. In fact, the main reason was that Mo Heng was in a good mood today. He was in a pretty good mood. He was exhilarated and proud of himself. Even when he was sleeping, his mouth was upturned. The person that Mo Heng sent to send Silen back was one of the two major generals. Although this person was still expressionless, at least when he looked at Silen, his eyes were not as cold and alienated as before. They also admired Silen's ability, so it was no wonder that Mo Heng wanted him. A person that could make those old academicians and old authorities speechless was definitely a rare person. Originally, the plan was to send Silen to the small planet Vanguard in the satellite belt, but due to the development of the situation, he was sent to another part of the planet instead. A few hours after Silen was brought out, the military sent out a message saying that they were going to organize a meet and greet. All the invited parties would gather at the stated location. Of course, the people attending the meet and greet were still the leaders of each party. They were allowed to bring a group of people with them, but the number of people and weapons were limited. The B squadrons of Vanguard stayed on the small planet in the satellite belt, but Songba Leruo and Bart had brought Hui Mao and Cheto with them. Silen could go there directly. Right now, part of the teams dispatched by each party had arrived at the mentioned coordinates on the planet. As for the remaining forces of each party, they naturally had their own arrangements. No one was an idiot, and they were all prepared. They wouldn't trust the military completely, not to mention that there were some people who often clashed with each other among these invited forces. Only when they were prepared would they be able to fight. The meeting point this time was specially circled out by the military for the purpose of a meet and greet. That being said, it would be best if the spaceplane didn't fly into the meeting point. After all, the spaceplane belonged to the military. If Scylla were to walk out of the military spaceplane and return to Vanguard in front of everyone's eyes, there was no telling what kind of trouble they would cause. That was why Scylla got off the spaceplane when he was still some distance away from the meeting point. He activated his hoverboard and flew toward the meeting point. Right now, he didn't know what the leaders were doing. The meeting hadn't started yet, and he didn't see a single big shot in sight. However, the small fries that came along with him were already talking to each other. You could see people wandering around outside everywhere. Scylla's arrival didn't attract any attention. It was too common for people of Scylla's age to wander around everywhere. In this place, most of the hunters were from the 4 great families, but he basically didn't know anyone he met. Scylla flew along the coordinates he obtained, and when he passed by a certain place, he suddenly sensed an unusual movement behind him. He dodged a whip and adjusted his hoverboard. Then, he skillfully hooked the hoverboard and stood still. The person who attacked him didn't seem to have any intention of attacking further. There was no killing intent in that attack just now, and it was more like a greeting. That was why Scylla didn't make a move. After he quickly steadied himself, he adjusted his hoverboard and hovered in place. Then, he turned around and looked at the person who attacked him behind him. "Yo, it really is you," the person said with joy in his voice. The corner of Scylla's eyebrows rose. A familiar face. Long time no see, Huzi. The person who attacked Scylla was none other than the crossdresser, Huzi, he met in Sector S's prison. Scylla had a good impression of Huzi. At the very least, she didn't run away alone when the passage door closed, and tried to pull Scylla out with a whip instead. This meant that Huzi was a good person. Right now, Huzi had changed her attire. She was still dressed as a man, and her mustache was curled at the sides. She stood on the hoverboard and grinned at Scylla. Looking at the area below him, Scylla asked, "You're from Fire Phoenix?" This area was assigned to the people of Sector S as a foothold, and right below it was Fire Phoenix's territory. In Sector S, Fire Phoenix was just like Flying Snake. They were one of the most famous forces in Sector S. Last time Scylla Halong's route wasn't in Fire Phoenix's territory, but he didn't think that this Huzi would appear there from so far away. Moreover, he didn't appear as a prisoner or a prison guard. There was no one from Fire Phoenix in that prison. Of course, Scylla wouldn't ask about the secret entanglements between the forces in Sector S. He wouldn't get a true answer even if he did. "Yeah, I'm from Fire Phoenix. It's fate that we meet again, and we're comrades who have gone through thick and thin together. Let me formally introduce myself. My name is Shanhua, and I'm here with Fire Phoenix to join in the fun." A pause later, Shanhua asked, "What's your name? Also, which force are you from? From the looks of it, you don't look like you'll be staying at the forces in Sector S. My name is Scylla, I'm from Vanguard." Scylla didn't plan to hide this. "Oh, one of the Great Four, Vanguard? You're pretty famous. I didn't think you'd have such a big background. I heard that the people of the Great Four who can come here are all important people in the Great Four. I'm not really an important person. It's pure coincidence that I'm here." Shanhua didn't believe Scylla's words, but she didn't plan to dwell on this question any longer. Instead, she asked, "Sai, I'm bored right now. Do you have any fun recommendations?" "No, I'm about to report back. I don't have time." Tisk, boring. While they were talking, another person flew over from below. However, this person didn't come from Fire Phoenix's territory, but from Flying Snake's territory. Flying Snake?" Shanhua said curiously. Based on her understanding of Flying Snake Tsijiu, this guy usually didn't pay attention to outsiders. "Scylla, long time no see." Sijiu said with a smile. Sijiu saw Silen and Shanhua in the air when he was bored and looked around with his binoculars just now. His main reason for flying over was still Silen. He didn't have a good chat with him last time at Sector S because there were too many things to do, and he was busy for a long time after that. He didn't have the chance to pay attention to Silen Halong's movements, and by the time he was free, these two people were nowhere to be seen. It was rare for him to meet someone he knew here, so of course he had to come over and say hello. Long time no see, Sijiu. Silen smiled and fist-bumped the flying Sijiu. You know each other? Shanhua looked at the duo and saw the smile on Sijiu's face. Their relationship wasn't bad, at least better than her relationship with Silen. They were familiar with each other. Since when did Flying Snake and Vanguard contact each other? We met each other by chance when we went to Sector S last time. Silen said. He didn't mention anything about Sijiu being rescued from danger. Sijiu and Silen were grateful for Silen's explanation. After all, no one was willing to announce those things to the public, let alone a fellow big-head Phoenix Flame of Sector S. Sijiu looked around and asked, "Why don't I see Lung? Is he here too?" "He should be, but not in this area. I'm from Vanguard, and he's on the other side. Why don't you give me your communicator's contact number, and I'll tell you when I get in touch with him." The military had set up a special local communication network in this assembly area, and there was a special frequency coverage in the assembly area. Sure. Leaving aside the fact that Silen Helong had saved Sijiu's life, befriending Silen Helong would be beneficial to Sijiu's own development. Sijiu believed in his own judgment. Shanhua also came over to exchange contact numbers. She was pretty bored here, and she heard that she would be staying here for a few more days. The meeting wouldn't end in a day. Many of his old friends hadn't come, and Shanhua was a person who couldn't stay idle. It wasn't easy for her to meet someone she knew, someone she could call an acquaintance. Adding Flying Snake, yes, and that Lung they mentioned, it shouldn't be too boring. After exchanging contact numbers, Silen continued to fly towards Vanguard. After Silen flew away, Shanhua followed Sijiu with interest. "Hey, how did you two meet? Do you want me to exchange information with you?" Sijiu glanced at her. "You didn't tell him that you're the disciple of the current Fire Phoenix?" "I didn't." Shanhua raised her thumb and stroked her mustache. Many people would have thoughts about her identity as the disciple of the current Fire Phoenix. It was precisely because of this that Shanhua often put on makeup and left home to roam the world. Fire Phoenix also let Shanhua's behavior be. This was also a form of growth, and it wasn't good to keep her by her side. "Is there a need?" Shanhua looked at Sijiu. Sijiu didn't reply. When Silen arrived at Vanguard's area, he could already see the cat sitting on Songba Leruo's hat from afar. Right now, Hui Mao was scratching his paw impatiently while Bart was teasing him with his long mustache. At first, Hui Mao just shook his ears and ignored Bart's teasing, but in the face of Bart's persistent harassment, Hui Mao finally moved his paw. While Hui Mao was feeling depressed because the B squadrons couldn't come to the meeting point, Bart and Songba Leruo expressed their willingness to bring Hui Mao and Cheto to the meeting point. Hui Mao thought for a moment and decided to tag along. With Bart and Songba Leruo's guarantee, Hui Mao wasn't afraid of the military or the monstrous scientists attacking him. But when he arrived, he discovered that he didn't even know them. Just as Hui Mao was about to shave the old bastard's mustache with his sharp claws, he suddenly sensed something and looked up into the sky. When he saw Silen, Hui Mao wanted to shout, "My savior!" He jumped down from Songba Leruo's hat and climbed up Silen's leg before Silen could stabilize the hoverboard. Then, he crouched on Silen's shoulder and shot Bart a, "What can you do now, look?" Bart simply stroked his mustache and smiled faintly without saying a word. Silen jumped down from the hoverboard and put it away. Then, he flicked Hui Mao's head and looked at Bart and Songba Leruo to greet them. "Lil Silen, are you done over there?" Bart asked. "It's done. The rest will be taken over by the people inside the military." Bart nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Since Bart and Songba Leruo had been moving all this time, they had already reached the edge of Vanguard's zone. Any further and they would be entering Lan Hyuti's zone. While Silen and Bart were talking about this newly lit sector, Huimao suddenly let out a shout and pointed his claw in a certain direction. Silen, look! It's that kid called Ghost Butterfly something who owes us money. Chapter 205. Huimao had never had any direct contact with Guidai Shichi before. Danlong had once told Huimao about Lan Hyuti, and under Huimao's strong request, he had even used a device to draw out Guidai Shichi's appearance. After serving under Silen for so long, Huimao had developed a temperament that would get excited at the mention of money. He had a deep impression of the people who owed him money, so when he saw the person on the debt list, Huimao became excited. Because Huimao was too excited, his voice was a little loud, so much so that the people around him turned to look at him. Then, they looked in the direction Huimao's claw was pointing at. Guidai Shichi was originally chatting with his two companions about the few big-breasted girls they had met on their way here, but Huimao's loud shout attracted their attention. Then, Guidai Shichi's stomach ached when he saw the person he really didn't want to see. Why is that bastard here? Moreover, because of Huimao's words, everyone's gazes were focused on them. Guidai Shichi just wanted to find a hole to hide in. Bart looked at the constipated expression on Guidai Shichi's face and smiled in relief. Even Lan Hyuti's people had times when they were humiliated like this. Long time no see. Silen raised his hand in greeting. The corner of Guidai Shichi's mouth twitched. Long time no see. The people around Guidai Shichi looked at Silen and wondered what level this person belonged to in Vanguard. Judging by age, he was either a B Squadron member or an assistant in the A Squadron. But when they looked at the two people next to him, whether it was Bart or Songba Leruo, they were both veterans. Who wouldn't know them? The person standing next to the two of them was not unfamiliar with them either. He didn't lower his stance either, so there was more to think about. Huimao stood on Silen's shoulder and stared at Guidai Shichi with round eyes, as if saying, if you don't admit it, I'll go up and scratch you. Ha, so you guys are from Vanguard. I was looking for you guys for a long time, but I couldn't find you. Do you have any contact information? Guidai Shichi took the initiative to walk over and said. It couldn't be helped. If he waited for Silen to take the initiative to speak, would he, Guidai Shichi, still have any face left? Moreover, Guidai Shichi had personally experienced that brat's character. He was definitely trash. Silen and Huimao weren't stupid enough to believe Guidai Shichi's bullshit. They just smiled at Guidai Shichi, making Guidai Shichi's hair stand on end. Bart patted Silen's shoulder and said, hee, you guys go ahead and chat. Songba Leruo and I will go somewhere else to meet our old friends. After Bart and Songba Leruo left, Guidai Shichi was visibly more relaxed. After all, the two of them were from the older generation. It was a little awkward to speak in front of them. Moreover, Guidai Shichi was used to being casual in Lan Hyuti, so he felt uncomfortable when he saw the older members of other hunter regiments. Brat, the normal stimulant elixirs and nutrition pills cost a total of 1 million, and that's not including the interest. Huimao said. Guidai Shichi glanced at Huimao. How did this pet know about his debt? Without thinking too much about it, Guidai Shichi put his hands in his trouser pockets and raised his chin. Why would Lan Hyuti do something so immoral? Find a place to swipe my card, and I'll transfer the money to you. Silen's communicator rang just as he was about to speak. The corner of Silen's eyes twitched when he saw the contact code displayed on the communicator. A 888888. Setting aside the question of which party the A represented, Silen knew that it was that idiot just from the 6/8 behind the contact code. Silen looked around and found a quiet place. As expected, Lung's face that had just woken up appeared on the communicator the moment the call connected. I was just about to look for you. But how did you know my contact code? Silen asked. Lung smiled proudly and scratched his hair that looked like a bird's nest. I got it from C.I. Jinchang. Hey, Wheeze, I have a new flavor of fish biscuits here. There are more than 10 flavors, including freshwater and saltwater fish flavors. Really? Huimao's dilated pupils showed his excitement. Here, look. Lung lifted up a plate in his hands. The biscuits on the plate were specially made into the shape of fish. Different flavors had different fish shapes. Silen, let's go look for Lung. It's none of our business as long as they don't fight here. Huimao slapped Silen's face with his claws and said. You guys can come over now. I have a newly built clubhouse here, and I'm planning to hold a small gathering while everyone is free. We're all familiar with each other, and I've already told Ci Jinchang and Knight about it. You should come as well. There are a few other familiar faces who will be coming later. Let's have a gathering. Alright. Oh right, did Cijiu ask you to invite him? Flying Snake. He's here too. Of course I'm inviting him. Who else is there too? Who's that figure behind you? Do I know him? Lung asked when he saw the figure behind Silen through the communicator. Silen adjusted the angle of the communicator so that Lung could see Guidai Shichi more clearly. When he saw the face on the communicator, Guidai Shichi's mood turned sour again. This guy wasn't a good guy either. However, just as Guidai Shichi braced himself for Lung's next words that made his stomach ache just like the cat on Silen's shoulder, Lung took a close look at Guidai Shichi and said with certainty, I don't know him. Guidai Shichi. This sentence didn't just make his stomach ache, even his balls hurt. Guidai Shichi never knew that his presence was this insignificant. Huimao's beard shook, how can you not know him? He's the one who was beaten half to death, the one who owed you money and was saved by you guys later. You even told me what he looked like back then. Guidai Shichi wanted to kill someone when he heard Huimao's words. Fortunately, there weren't many people here, and their voices weren't loud, otherwise they would be laughed at for a long time if they were overheard. After looking again, Lung finally remembered that he didn't usually have a good memory for people who didn't trade money with him. So it's that perverted butterfly. Since we've bumped into each other, let's come over together. Alright, I'm not going to talk to you guys anymore. I'm hungry, I'm going to look for food, see you later, beep. Before Silen could finish, the guy cut him off. Putting away the communicator, Silen looked at Guidai Shichi, let's go, we'll go to that rich guy. He has everything, and we can even get some food. Guidai Shichi was quite unwilling to go, he really didn't dare compliment the characters of these two people. But, a rich guy. Who is he? Guidai Shichi asked. Silen looked at Guidai Shichi in surprise, you don't know who he is? That guy's appearance rate in the media is quite high. Guidai Shichi was conflicted. He had been busy and didn't have time to pay attention to that, and after a simple check on Silen, he didn't check again. He was really busy at that time. Seeing Guidai Shichi's conflicted look, Silen said, his name is Endrira Lung. Fuck. It turned out to be that poor family that only had money left. No matter what, he had to go get some food. Let's go. Guidai Shichi said angrily. Wait, I'll call someone else. Silen contacted Cijiu, but Pianhua kept an eye on Cijiu, so when Cijiu made a move, she followed. They arranged to meet at the border between Vanguard and Lan Hudi. After all, Cijiu and the others weren't part of the hunter group, so they couldn't enter any of the areas, so they could only meet at the border. When they arrived at the place that Lung mentioned, they all had the same lament. What a wastrel. The place where Lung and the Andrira family were located was surrounded by the more famous families and business groups in the League of Stars, so this area was the kind that blinded the eyes, but the Andrira family was especially eye-catching. The temporary entertainment area that Lung mentioned was comparable to a high-class hotel. There were servants waiting in front of the door, but other than these servants, there was also a familiar skinny figure walking out from inside, obviously coming for Silen. The person who came was Berzette. There were a few youngsters talking in the private room above, and Lung felt that it wasn't good for them to talk freely with Berzette around, so he kicked Berzette out and told him to wait for Silen at the door. Brzett brought Silin and the others to the floor where Lung and the others were. The little old man's every movement was still very gentlemanly, and he also had a very kind smile on his face, but Sijiu and Guidai Shichi were all tensed up. They could feel that this little old man was very strong, and not someone they could deal with. Even if Brzett didn't show any evil intentions, Sijiu and Guidai Shichi just couldn't let their guard down. This was a habit that had been cultivated for a long time. Suddenly coming to a new environment and seeing strangers, who would let down their guard so easily. Brzett didn't mind, and was still as kind as if he was looking at a descendant of his own bloodline. Brzett brought Silin and the others to a door and politely made an inviting gesture with his hand. The young master is inside. Sigh, it's better for an old man like me to not attend a gathering of youngsters. I'll only be despised if I do. Seriously, every generation of Andrira's successors had the same bad temper. Right now, he was already looking forward to the next direct descendant of Andrira, or Lung's descendant. It was much more interesting to be led by a little kid. Thank you. Silin returned a salute. He was still rather respectful towards the little old man Brzett. When he pushed open the door, a few people were already seated around the prepared chairs inside. Most of them were familiar faces, but there were two he didn't know. Lung, Knight, Ci Jincheng, Pride, Teresa, and Yu Linglong, who was sitting in a special wheelchair. When he saw Silin come in, Lung stood up and waved. Hurry up, Silin, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Hey, Flying Snake, I didn't expect someone from Sector S to come as well. Please take a seat, everyone. It could be said that the people sitting here right now were all reputable figures of their generation. They were all people who held real power in their respective forces, so even if they usually carried an air of arrogance around them, they had to put it away for now. Pride had matured quite a bit after so many years. Although his eyes still carried a habitual air of arrogance, it was already a lot better than before. Originally, Pride was busy with other missions and couldn't come to Sector Z. But after Ji Feiheng told him about Silin's situation, and after he confirmed it with Knight, he set aside his mission and came here. Humph. Pride still gave that trademark snort, but there was no hint of contempt in it. Silin didn't mind. After getting familiar with him, he knew that this kid was actually just this awkward. When he was embarrassed, when he didn't know what to say, he would just give a humph. Everyone knew it, but they didn't point it out. Yu Linglong returned a sweet smile to Silin. She was still about the same as the little girl he remembered from back then. No one sat on the seat next to Yu Linglong, and no one dared to. Everyone knew who this seat belonged to. Sijiu and Guidai Shichi very perceptively snatched the two seats next to Yu Linglong. Pai Hua swept his gaze across the group once before sitting next to Sijiu. He didn't squeeze into the seat next to Yu Linglong, and just stared at them curiously. Silin sat down next to Yu Linglong and looked at her feet. Her feet were wrapped in rehabilitation equipment that was obviously the same as Diasa's after undergoing the differentiation therapy. What happened? Silin asked. It was an accident. It broke. Yu Linglong answered in a low voice. Her tone was obviously filled with great grievance. Lung, Knight, and the rest immediately shuddered. Little Princess Yu, where's that overbearing aura you had 2 minutes ago? Silin sighed on the inside. After learning of Yu Linglong's identity, he also understood that everything that happened around her was not simple. There was obviously a very complicated reason why her feet were broken. Since Yu Linglong didn't want to talk about it, he didn't ask anymore. How are you recovering now? It's all right. I can barely walk, but I can't run. It hurts a lot. She was still feeling wronged. Lung, Knight, and the rest turned their heads sideways and looked at the ground, pretending to know nothing. Little Princess Yu, you're lying. I saw you kicking an apple falling from a tree to pieces just 2 days ago. Why didn't you say it hurt then? Teresa, who had been watching all this time, pursed her lips and smiled. She raised the wine glass in her hand and gestured, long time no see, Silin. Teresa looked about the same as before. Time had not affected the beauty of Seven Lights' famous beauty saw, but Scylla knew that Teresa was no longer the Gallo Teresa of the past. Teresa Douance, Aiflon Douance's eldest daughter. This was Teresa's true identity. Back then, Scylla had already discovered the genetic relationship between Teresa and Aiflon. Long time no see, beauty saw is still the same. But you've changed. You're not as handsome as before. Teresa teased. Ahem. Under Yulinglong's coercion, Lung snapped his fingers, and a big plate of fish biscuits was served. Wow! Hui Mao jumped onto the big plate and rolled around, smearing all the fish biscuits with his scent. How do you feel about this present? Lung picked up a fish biscuit and tossed it towards Hui Mao. Hui Mao caught it with his mouth, chewed twice and swallowed it. It tastes pretty good. I'm going to pack it up and bring it back later. Sure, I'll have someone deliver it to you. Hui's moved the plate of fish biscuits to the side and ate happily on its own. It ignored Scylla and Hui's completely. The group of people gathered together, and as the host, Lung gave everyone a formal introduction. He only introduced them by name and a few simple things. Today's dinner did not involve any secrets, and it was just a gathering of peers. Among the people Scylla did not recognize, there were two people who were similar to Alan Chev back in the day. However, according to Lung's introduction, the electronic publications behind them were much higher ranked than the Allen families. Both of them had more than 80 contribution points. Phineas was backed by a famous internet information magnate with more than 80 contribution points in the League of Stars. Back when Scylla was still at Seven Lights, he had once reported on the Sector Championships Limitless. He was somewhat related to Lung. Fan Yuzhuo was also backed by a famous business-related media magnate with more than 80 contribution points in the League of Stars, Lux. Since he mainly reported on the business sector, he had a lot of contact with Lung. If the two media giants Limitless and Lux could reach their current level, then the children they taught wouldn't be bad. At the very least, they wouldn't be muddle-headed when it came to judging and handling people. Therefore, even though they were facing people like Scylla who weren't exactly famous in the upper circle, the two of them would not look down on them. Plus, Lung, Knight, Ci Jincheng, Yu Linglong and many more people valued them. Why should they look down on them? If they didn't even have this little bit of foresight, then what the hell were they supposed to do? The two young masters of the media giants were also very interested in the trio who came with Scylla. Pian Hua saw that everyone had stated their background, and after a moment of thought, he revealed his identity as Fire Phoenix's disciple. Flying Snake had no intention of hiding his identity either. Phineas and Fan Yuzhuo were obviously more curious about Sector S. After all, the League of Stars' media had the least involvement other than Sector Z. Now that Sector Z was half open to the public, only Sector S was left. After that, the four of them had a very congenial conversation. Lung had said that today was just a small gathering. They would not talk about business, and only talk about entertainment. Without the interference of their elders, everyone was chatting happily. They talked and laughed at each other's embarrassing moments. At the very least, the atmosphere was pretty good. No one bothered to find out how many complicated things you had behind you, or how many shameful criminal records you had. In reality, everyone would probably find out who had a criminal record not long after this gathering. They might not be able to investigate detailed secrets with their abilities, but they definitely had the ability to gather some general information and rumors. After all, this was a large military area, so they didn't dare to play too wildly. They just ate, drank, and laughed to relax everyone. At the same time, they also felt at ease. This could be considered a group. After all, it was far too easy for a lone force to become cannon fodder in this chaotic situation. No matter how high you stood, there was always a chance that you would fall. Also, judging from the current situation, if you fell, you wouldn't be able to climb the mountain again. Everyone had eaten their fill during the meal, and the worries in their hearts had eased a little. They drank a little too much, so Lung sent people to send them back. Pian Hua was having a great drinking contest with a group of men, and she had even knocked out the two young masters of the media giants. They had even started calling each other bro and bro. Silen didn't know if Phineas and Finuzwa had seen through Pian Hua's disguise, but it sounded like they were calling each other bro pretty smoothly. Pian Hua herself was a little drunk. Luckily, they were the only ones who knew that Pian Hua was a woman. If everyone else knew, then they would have lost a lot of face. Zijiu had already predicted Fire Phoenix's fury, so it was best to avoid Pian Hua for the next few days. Yu Linglong sat on her wheelchair with her head slightly bowed. She did not ask anyone to pick her up, and instead said to Silen, "Send me off." Okay. Silen did not plan to ask Lung to send someone off just now. Since he had decided to send Yu Linglong off, then he asked Lung to send Hui Mao back. This guy had to supervise the fish biscuits anyway. They didn't use a flying car. Yu Linglong's area wasn't too far from here, and she didn't want to take a flying car, so she asked Silen to push her around. Night had already fallen in this area, and at the same time, the temperature difference between day and night was relatively large. Unlike the terrain of the hunter group, the natural scenery here was much better. After walking a few steps, they could see a small stream. Silen could feel the vitality of the stream. Under the rocky ground, there were living creatures swimming back and forth in the stream. Not far away, there was a stone bridge that looked very ancient, but Yu Linglong suggested walking over it. The stream wasn't deep, not even reaching their knees, so they didn't have to worry about drowning. Your foot is still in the treatment period, so you can't touch the stream. Silen said. It's fine, the treatment device on my foot is waterproof. Saying that, Yu Linglong stood up and pressed a button on her wheelchair. The original wheelchair automatically folded up and floated 1 meter away from Yu Linglong. She was a little stiff from sitting for too long today, so she stood up and held onto Silen's arm as they slowly walked forward. The area of the rich was very particular. Although the security system here was very good, it still maintained the natural appearance to a large extent, and there were even some sounds of insects. The two didn't say anything, and when they reached the edge of the water, Silen stopped. He slowly knelt down and pulled Yu Linglong's skirt that was almost hanging to the ground up to her knees and tied a knot. This way, the skirt wouldn't touch the water, and it could also protect her knees. The night was relatively cold, and the stream was even colder. It was important to take good care of the joints of a recovering patient. Yu Linglong felt very hot on her face, and 2 patches of red faintly spread out. However, the twilight covered her blush very well, but her current mood could be seen from her bright and gentle smiling eyes. Yu Linglong lowered her head and looked at Silen's movements. Because of her identity, Yu Linglong had always looked down on others with a strong aura, displaying the unique pride of the little princess of the Yu family. However, from this angle, her mood and performance were completely different. Are you cold? Silen raised his head and asked after tying the knot on Yu Linglong's long skirt. Hearing Silen's question, Yu Linglong was slightly stunned, and then lightly shook her head. A slight smile appeared on her face, as though she was still an inexperienced little girl, and not the little princess of the Yu family that made Long and the others go crazy from time to time. Silen also rolled up his trousers, threw his shoes over the side of the stream, and slowly led Yu Linglong into the stream. Silen first walked in the stream, and then helped Yu Linglong into the water. The cool stream water cooled down the heat caused by the alcohol, and they could feel the fish in the stream pecking at their feet. However, the night on this planet was really cold. Silen tested the temperature, and it was only about 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. Even if Yu Linglong was wearing a waterproof treatment device, it would still have some effect. Silen let Yu Linglong help him walk about a meter into the stream, and when they were about 10 meters away from the other side, he stopped again. Silen bent down, and said, "All right, now that you've tasted the freshness, come on up, I'll carry you. The stream is cold, and it won't be good for your recovery if you catch a cold." "Okay." Yu Linglong replied obediently. If someone who was familiar with Yu Linglong saw the usually domineering Yu Linglong being so obedient, their eyes would definitely pop out of their sockets. Yu Linglong leaned on Silen's back, and her head rested on Silen's shoulder. Listening to their breathing and the chirping of the surrounding insects, she felt an inexplicable sense of peace. Silen carried Yu Linglong on his back, and walked to the other side of the stream. Yu Linglong touched the string around Silen's neck, and asked, "What are you wearing?" "A person," Silen replied. Yu Linglong's hands stopped moving, and she didn't ask anymore. There was no point in arguing about the living and the dead. Yu Linglong understood, so she didn't argue about it. However, she tightened her grip on Silen's neck. They quickly covered the distance of 10 meters. "All right, little princess, come down." Yu Linglong pouted, and reluctantly got down. The folded wheelchair floated down, and unfolded. Silen helped Yu Linglong sit on it, and used his sleeve to wipe the water off her legs. He loosened the knotted skirt to cover her legs, and adjusted the thermal insulation on the wheelchair. Silen pushed the wheelchair towards the place Yu Linglong mentioned. When they approached the area, there was a group of people waiting there, but none of them came forward. Obviously, they knew little princess Yu's temperament very well. Silen pushed the wheelchair all the way to that side, and handed it to the person who took over. However, Yu Linglong turned the wheelchair around, and looked at Silen quietly. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were obviously waiting for something. Silen sighed, and said, "Give me your hand." Yu Linglong's eyes curved into 2 crescent moons, and she quickly extended her hand. Silen placed a large green pearl on Yu Linglong's hand. Under the twilight, it emitted a gentle green light, and it made people feel that it was full of vitality. Yu Linglong could feel the warmth emitted from the green pearl, and the vitality transmitted to her palm. Even her breathing became much smoother. Of course, she knew that this thing was very precious. At least, with her status as the little princess of the Yu family, she had never seen such a special pearl until now. "This is for you, it's good for your body's recovery." "Thank you," Yu Linglong said, holding the green pearl in her hand happily. "I should be the one saying thank you." Silen didn't know what Yu Linglong saw in him, but during the days when Silen was in the 6th division, Yu Linglong had helped him a lot, both openly and secretly. Some of which Silen didn't even know. Looking at Yu Linglong's childlike expression, Silen stretched out his hand and rubbed Yu Linglong's head like how he rubbed Tang Qiuqiu. The group of people behind Yu Linglong were so shocked that their jaws dropped. Their dog eyes were really blind. Shi actually rubbed the little princess's head. The worst thing was that the little princess actually had a shy expression. "Go back and rest early." "Okay." After saying goodbye, Silen walked back, but he didn't use his hoverboard to fly away. This area was currently forbidden for outsiders to fly in the air, and the moment he flew up, he would probably become a sieve for the guards and robots of the various families hidden in the dark. After walking until he couldn't see the people of the Yu family, Silen raised his head to look at the sky, and then gave a middle finger. Somewhere high up in the sky, a small round ball was floating there. On the other side of the small round ball was a room in Lung's leisure house. Lung, Knight, and Ci Jincheng were huddled there staring at the screen. When they saw the big middle finger on the screen, the 3 colleagues shouted, "Fuck! How did this guy find out?" Lung was conflicted. "Perverted senses," Knight said. Ci Jincheng didn't say anything. He was wondering where on earth the problem was. This surveillance device was floating high up in the sky where it was hard to see with the naked eye, and it was night time right now. How on earth did Silen discover it? Silen didn't know about the 3 fellows' conflict, but he knew that they wouldn't stay put the moment he pushed Yu Linglong out. Lung's side wasn't the only one monitoring him. However, the other parties weren't doing too well, and they were constantly being disrupted by unknown signals. It was Cheto's doing. Silen arrived at the border of several forces. It was the neutral zone, and a lot of people were flying along it. Even though it was very late right now, there were still a lot of hoverboards, flying cars, and so on. Silen shot a glance in the direction of the little stream he passed by with Yu Linglong on his back. Then, he activated his hoverboard, jumped onto it, and flew towards the vanguard's area. Some time after Silen's departure, the number of people in this area gradually decreased. There was only one person flying in the neutral zone every 10 or so minutes. After a flying car whizzed past, everything became quiet again. The only sound one could hear was the chirping of insects. Meanwhile, a human figure gradually rose from the surface of the little stream. Silen and Yulinglong passed by. Its face couldn't be seen clearly, and it looked like it was made entirely out of water. The figure stopped rising after its torso was exposed. The water person looked at the neutral zone and said, "Did that little guy discover me?" "I think so." The voice that answered the water person came from the forest not far away, but there was no one in sight. A gust of wind blew past, and a leaf drifted down. However, it was blocked by an invisible object on its way down, and it made a turn before landing somewhere else. "Forget it, who cares? Our target can't be him anyway," the water person said. "Why can't it be him? Don't underestimate that brat. On the contrary, that brat has the item." "Really? That brat doesn't seem to be very powerful." "He's still a little lacking in power, but he was able to discover your existence, so he must have hidden himself quite well. Let's not touch him for now and observe the situation first." "All right." The water person dove back into the water, and everything returned to normal. The flying cars that occasionally passed by the neutral zone had no idea that there were two people here. By the time Silen returned to the vanguard's territory, it was already quite late. Apart from the people on shift duty, most of the others were already resting, so Silen walked into his room without alerting anyone. As soon as he entered the room, he was greeted by the smell of fish. There was a big box full of fish biscuits in the room. Judging from the situation, Huemao's storage cabinet couldn't fit all the fish biscuits in there. Among the fish biscuits, there was a cat with the tip of its ears sticking out. It moved a little when Silen walked in, but nothing else happened after that. Silen shook his head and let the cat go for now. Standing at the corner, Cheto opened his eyes and closed them again when he saw that Silen had no intention of talking to him. After washing up, Silen lay down on the bed and thought about what happened today. The gathering at Sloane's place was a small matter. The first thing that puzzled him was Yulinglong's injuries. When he was carrying Yulinglong on his back, he clearly noticed that there was something wrong with her breathing system and heartbeat. Yulinglong's emotions were part of the reason, but the main reason was that her internal organs had been seriously injured. Her breathing looked normal at first glance, but Yulinglong's internal organs were seriously damaged. Who could have hurt her like that when she was under the protection of so many people in the Yu family? Her internal organs were seriously damaged, and her legs were broken. It wasn't hard to imagine that Yulinglong had a brush with death. Silen could see that Yulinglong's injury was related to the Yu family, but the second thing that puzzled Silen wasn't as simple as it seemed. When Silen walked into the stream, he sensed something unusual in the water, but he didn't sense any danger. Moreover, there were a lot of Yu family guards hiding in the dark at the time, and they would have come out at the first sign of trouble. That was why Silen pretended not to notice anything and walked across the stream with Yulinglong on his back. But when he came back, he noticed an unusual presence in the forest even though he was walking on the stone bridge. The other party hid themselves very well, and Silen wouldn't have noticed them if he hadn't met them before. The man who once appeared in the prison, Azrael's men, had arrived here without anyone knowing. So, what was their purpose this time? At the very least, Silen hadn't sensed any large-scale strange phenomenon until now. But did the military know about the arrival of Azrael? No matter what, Silen had to be vigilant. Azrael's men were all crazy, and no one knew what they were thinking. Early the next morning, Carrie and the others who knew that Silen would return late came to look for Silen, and wanted this vice-captain to tell them about his romantic encounter. To reach Silen's room, they had to pass through a hall in the middle of this floor, but Carrie swallowed his clamor the moment he arrived at the hall. Nah. Senior Nada sat on the sofa in the hall, reading a paper book in his hand, and beside him was a box. Towards Carrie and the others' clamor, he just smiled and said, "You're in good spirits." Carrie, Xiao Shang, and the others scratched their heads with a smile, not knowing how to react. Nada was definitely here to look for Silen. Carrie and the others stood there awkwardly for a while before leaving. Facing such a senior, it was really nerve-wracking. Not everyone could be as calm as Silen. When Silen woke up, Nada had already flipped more than 10 pages of the book. I'm really sorry, Senior Nada. Why didn't you ask them to wake me up? It's okay, you're tired too. Silen walked over and took out a bottle of water and some jerky from the storage cabinet. When he passed it to Nada, Nada waved his hand. You can eat, I've already eaten. Silen didn't hesitate and started eating in front of Nada. What brings you here? Silen asked while chewing on the jerky. The rule of not talking when eating or sleeping didn't apply to hunters. Hunters didn't have time to follow those time-wasting etiquette. Nada closed the book and pushed the box in front of Silen. These are some parasite samples collected by some of my friends over the years. You can take a look if you're interested. Silen clapped his hands, wiped his fingers clean and carefully opened the box. There were some sealed samples in the box. The bigger parasites only had some images and the samples were only a part of their body. As for the smaller parasites, there were whole ones and half of them. They had different shapes, some were ferocious, some were normal. There are some related records of these parasites in the video. It's definitely not as good as the professional records. It's just a rough record. Just make do with it. Silen closed the box and smiled, this is enough. They're very precious samples. Nada nodded, some of them are very special. There are also some that I couldn't get samples of, only some images. I took a look and there are a few that are really rare. If I have the chance, I might as well catch one. Silen didn't look at the images. After finishing his breakfast, he brought the box to his room and put it away. Do you have any plans for the morning? If you don't have any plans, accompany this old man for a walk. Nada said. I don't have any plans. Please wait a moment. Silen changed his clothes and brought some essentials with him. Then, he walked out with Nada. I heard that you went to Andrira's boy yesterday. And Lan Hudi's men. Silen didn't deny it. Many people knew about this. It's a good thing. Whether it's Andrira's, Lan Hudi's, or the people of Sector S, it's a good thing to get to know them. I know that you have a wide network of contacts, and these are all good for your future development. It may not be beneficial to use the old standards, but given the current situation, I believe you can analyze it even if you don't know much. Right now, it's not as stable as it used to be. Although Silen didn't agree with some of Nada's views, Nada was teaching him sincerely. Silen just listened attentively. Nada continued, yesterday, a few old fellows in the A squadron had a small meeting. Although the leaders' meeting hadn't started yet, everyone had analyzed some things according to the information we received. Other than the military's absolute control of Sector Z, the rest of the places will be divided. The military doesn't have a stomach big enough to swallow up this big sector in one go. Hunter groups and the like will have at least 10 years of occupation rights. As for the development and collection of resources on each planet, whether or not they can take over the areas they have been allocated will depend on their own abilities. Will there be a lot of competition? Silen asked. Competition, that's for sure. I'm guessing that the leaders will draw randomly when the time comes, and those who get more resources will naturally be eyed by those with less resources. Therefore, your B squadron's free missions will be cancelled. When the time comes, you'll have to stay in your assigned area for a longer period of time and deal with the traps in the dark. You must be prepared for all of this. Amen, I know. This was the benefit of being a big force. Once there was a cake, the big forces in the League of Stars would divide it up cleanly. The small forces couldn't even eat the dregs. While Nada was explaining some things to pay attention to, his intention was to let Silen be mentally prepared. He didn't tell these things directly to Shoten, but to Silen instead. It was obvious how much Nada valued Silen. In Nada's eyes, Silen was far more important than Shoten. Both his strength and connections satisfied Nada very much. As the duo walked, they approached the neutral zone. There was a flying car waiting for Nada. "Never mind, we'll stop here. I still have some matters to attend to. You go do your own thing." After watching Nada enter the flying car and leave, Silen also turned around and prepared to go back. It was at this moment a few people on hoverboards flew over and laughed loudly. Hearing the laughter, Silen turned around abruptly. There were only a few backs left in the air. They looked very ordinary, just like the young people he saw when he first came to this area. The laughter of the people on the hoverboards disappeared in an instant, but it triggered a memory buried deep in Silen's mind. It was one of the two voices that had been troubling him all this time. Fog, or Wuxia. Chapter 206. It was the two voices that Silen had memorized deeply after the hypnosis effect was broken. One of the voices had hypnotized Silen. Although he didn't know which side, Mist, or Wuxia, belonged to, it seemed that the person who had hypnotized Silen wasn't this person. Silen could tell that the voice hadn't interfered with his consciousness, which meant that the person who had hypnotized him was someone else. Be it Mist or Wuxia, they were flying around the neutral zone openly on hoverboards without anyone noticing them. It was truly dangerous. After all, they were two top assassin organizations. This was the military's territory, and all the satellite surveillance was in the military's hands. Right now, Silen didn't dare let Cheto invade this place. There were too many experts here, and both he and Cheto would be done for if they were caught. After cleaning up his thoughts, Silen flew back to the base. There were some things he needed to explain as soon as possible. Just like Nada said, a portion of people had arrived as the day of the leaders' summit drew closer and closer. Carrie and the others were the first batch of Vanguard's follow-up forces, and the second batch would come to replace the first batch. However, every B squadron would send a portion of their people instead of all of them. Then, they would take shifts so that everyone could see the planet and familiarize themselves with the environment and terrain. After Carrie and Xiao Shang's shift, the 7th B squadron took over. Carrie and the others had to return to the small planet in the satellite belt. Unlike Silen and the A Squadron, they couldn't stay here forever. However, Cheto didn't leave. He stayed inside Silen's room and kept an eye on things without anyone noticing. Before Carrie and the others left, Silen had a talk with them and told them to train as soon as possible. "Lieutenant, is there work to do?" Carrie rubbed his palms together. "It's always good to be prepared." Silen didn't say it out loud, but it was enough. "All right. Don't worry, I'll pass on the lieutenant's message. Even that white fatty will be watching closely. Tell the others to pay more attention." In reality, Silen knew that the situation was even more complicated and serious than Nada had made it out to be. It would be fine if it was just a fight for resources, but what if it was about a Lilo? 50 years ago, it was just one incident that involved several parties. Now, they were all gathered here. Once Alalo's senses discovered them, even if they didn't start fighting now, the war that would erupt after they left this planet was not something that could be compared to 50 years ago. After Silen and the others had left, Silen couldn't help but feel a little irritated. He didn't know if it was because of the voice he heard earlier or something else, but he just couldn't calm down. He was planning to study the parasite samples Nada had given him, but he wasn't in a good state right now. He didn't have the mood to study the samples at all and just stared blankly at them. In the end, Silen went around on his hoverboard alone. At the meeting area the military had circled out, there were small automated service points built at intervals. These places provided food, some basic necessities, and some small entertainment. Some young people from different forces would drag old friends they hadn't seen for many years to these places. Therefore, there were a lot of people at every service point. Silen bought a glass of fruit juice from a small beverage shop. He didn't order alcohol. His mind was already muddled and irritated to begin with, and drinking would only make him even more muddled. Right now, he needed to calm down and think about things. The surroundings were very noisy, but there were still some empty seats around this beverage shop. They were all open air. Silen sat down in front of a small table for two and drank fruit juice under an umbrella that blocked out the light. He watched the people coming and going. The young people were in groups of 3 to 5, with the symbols of different forces. They were jostling and joking. Silen also saw a 13 or 14-year-old girl with a butterfly tattoo on her arm. Different from Guidai Shichi's ghost butterfly tattoo, the butterfly tattoo on her arm was a swallowtail butterfly, and the pattern on the swallowtail butterfly's wings was like that of a tiger. Silen heard her companions call her Tiger Phoenix. Lan Hudi's swallowtail butterfly was her subordinate. Qing Feng handed the juice to Tiger Phoenix. Noticing Silen's gaze, she looked back at him, then withdrew her gaze and left with Tiger Phoenix. After Lan Hudi's two subordinates left, Silen looked around again. The cold temperature of the juice didn't calm Silen down. It was not because of the noise around, but because he had a feeling that something was going to happen. Silen's fingers were tapping on the juice glass unconsciously. Suddenly, his movement stopped, and all the hair on his body almost stood out. Silen saw a person who looked very ordinary, and his appearance and clothes were not eye-catching. However, it was this person who made Silen feel that he was surrounded by icicles, and if he moved a little bit, he would be pierced into pieces. Yes, this was the reason for his irritation. After the shock, the irritation in Silen's heart subsided. That person just walked over step by step. There was nothing special about him. His steps were not big, and he was neither fast nor slow. Through that pair of pupils, Silen couldn't see the hidden emotions in them at all. At first glance, he seemed to be smiling casually, but when he looked carefully, he found that he couldn't see anything. Silen knew too well what such eyes meant. It was either a killer or a person who was so cold that he was almost cruel and numb. The others who weren't stared at by that person didn't have any abnormal reactions. They were still drinking and chatting, and they didn't know that there was such a killer approaching step by step. Only when they met that person's eyes would they understand the uniqueness and horror of this person. Now, Silen felt like he was in a world of ice and snow. His whole body was cold, and he stood there motionlessly. His whole body was tense, and he was ready to fight at any time. Although Silen knew that his death rate in this fight was more than 70%, he had no way out when facing this person. Silen was even careful with every breath, and he always kept his state at the peak. However, under the gaze of this person, Silen was quite clear about the disparity in strength between the two sides. There were weapons hidden in Silen's leaf-patterned ring, including guns and cannons. However, against such a person, he would be killed before he could take out the weapons. Therefore, Silen still put more attention on this person, and at the same time, his mind quickly turned to think of a way out. The strange thing was that when the person walked 5 meters in front of Silen, he suddenly stopped. The look in his eyes seemed to be a little surprised, and then he smiled at Silen. That smile made Silen feel even colder, but the good thing was that the person's line of sight turned away and walked in another direction. It wasn't until the figure was submerged in the crowd for a long time that Silen slowly let his tense muscles relax, and his back was full of cold sweat. The mouthful of juice was really cold. "Do you know who he is?" The sudden voice shocked Silen. After he reacted, he looked behind him. He really didn't feel anyone behind him, but perhaps it was because of this person behind that the person didn't make a move. Just now, Silen was sure that the person's target was him, and he only changed his mind later. "Hunting knife Gaydar. You're also invited to the summit?" Silen asked. The person standing behind Silen was indeed Hunting Knife Gaydar, and he still looked like a harmless academic. Gaydar sat opposite Silen with a glass of juice and smiled. "Yeah, but I'm not like you Vanguard people. I'm a lone ranger after all, and the only reason they invited me here was to sign a treaty and set their minds at ease. I don't have the right to divide the area or anything, but I will get a sum of contract money." After thinking for a moment, Silen understood the meaning behind it. After he thought it through, the problem returned to its original track. Who was that person just now? That person. Gaydar swirled the juice in his glass. Back then, he beat me half to death, and it took me more than a dozen years to recover. Scylla nearly spat out the juice in his mouth. It turned out that Gaydar was squatting in Sector S's prison after he was injured, but it was a good place to recuperate. At the very least, it was well hidden. However, someone who could injure hunting knife Gaydar. Scylla's eyes widened, and his fingers made a 6, and then a 1. Yes, he is one of the 6 stars lone hunters. As expected of that level. Among the 6 stars of hunt, other than the 4 from the Big 4, you know of 2 lone hunters, right? Scylla nodded, but I don't know who they are. It was true that with Scylla's current identity and level, he could not meet the people who stood at the top yet. But what was up with that person just now? Scylla did not think that he had offended him. One of the 2 lone hunters is all right. She is the only female among the 6 stars of hunt, Xian Prisa. She has a lazy personality and does things according to her own preferences, but at least she's not bloodthirsty. Strictly speaking, she's not a lone hunter. Scylla raised an eyebrow. He really did not expect there to be a woman among the 6 stars of hunt. As for the other person, that's the one you met just now. Osculo, that guy kills as easily as he eats. He is known as the loneliest and most vicious lone hunter. The people he knows have all killed their way to the top, and he only recognizes them if they can survive his attacks. As for the people he has decided to kill, other than a few star hunters and a few from the Heavenly Edict Empire, no one is still alive. Then it was just a spur of the moment. He hasn't made up his mind to kill you yet. However, Gaydar looked at Scylla. I'm not trying to discourage you, but based on what I know about Osculo, he definitely has his eyes on you. Scylla caught the other meaning in Gaydar's words. Just eyes on me. He doesn't want to kill me. That depends on what he has on you that is worth his attention. He is a person who will not make a move without direct benefits. Of course, that doesn't rule out the possibility that he might kill on a whim for fun. Olilo's star map fragment. However, he didn't feel the attraction from Olilo's star map just now. Gaydar could tell what Scylla was thinking. He said, there's no need to doubt it. It's exactly what you're thinking. Some people have the means to hide the attraction and resonance. Scylla frowned. In other words, the people who were targeted were those who did not have the ability to hide the attraction and resonance, and he was one of them. Do you want to know how to hide them? Gaydar asked with a faint smile. Scylla looked at Gaydar. This lone traveler's smile was sly no matter how he looked at it. Senior, if you have any requests, just tell me. I like to talk to smart people. Gaydar finished the juice in the glass, but he still held the empty glass in his hand and played with it. I can tell you how to hide it, and I can also give you a piece of Olilo's star map fragment. Of course, this fragment is not the type you want, but it is the type that the Andryra family needs. Scylla lowered his eyes and did not say anything, quietly waiting for Gaydar to continue. Seeing that Scylla did not respond, Gaydar continued, the conditions are actually not much. When the time comes, after you collect the Olilo's star map and activate Olilo, I want to accompany you. Of course, I promise I won't delay your matters, and I might even be able to help you. Senior Gaydar, let's not talk about whether I can get it or not. How do you know what kind of fragment I have? Out of the 5 Olilos, only 2 are known. Excluding the one from the Andryra family, I don't know what the remaining 2 are. I know what kind of fragment you have, and the people looking for it are not people you can resist. Azrael and Osculo are both waiting for the one you have. Scylla was shocked. There was actually an Azrael. However, from what Gaydar said, he did not know that he actually had 2 pieces. What's this in my hand? Celine asked. In the myth of creation, the one that represents new life is called a shortcut. Shortcut? I once heard a guy from Azrael say that the shortcut might be a space jump point, a jump point to a jump point outside of the star system where the League of Stars is located. This news undoubtedly shocked Scylla. Due to the abnormal environment around the star system where the League of Stars was located, the League of Stars Research Institute had tried some space technology, but to no avail. That was why no one from outside the star system had ever entered the star system of the League of Stars, and no one from the League of Stars had ever gone out. Even the people from the Big Four could only go out a little around the star system, but could not completely escape. If this news were to be known by the military, even Knight and Mo Hung would not be able to protect Sillin. But was he going to hand it over to the people from Vanguard now? I advise you to keep it for yourself. Vanguard isn't as united as a piece of iron. Unless Ji Feng personally promises it, don't take it out easily. If Sillin agreed with Gaydar, then the best time was to wait for him to join the A-Team. But before he joined the A-Team, then how can I guarantee that I won't be killed by Azrael and Osculo, the Star Hunter? Don't worry about the people from Azrael. Their main goal right now isn't to get the shard, but to find it. The most important thing for you right now is to escape Osculo's knife. Easy for you to say. How am I supposed to escape? Run to Ji Feng's place. If you run to Ji Feng's place now, it'll undoubtedly be a direct confrontation between Ji Feng and Osculo. With the current situation, more than half of the people in Vanguard will die. Sillin fell silent. Don't worry. I've already divined for you. There will be ups and downs, but you won't die in the end. Sillin was so angry that he laughed. I didn't know that Senior Gaydar believed in this. Gaydar simply said, some things have to be believed. Some things have to be believed. Sillin thinks of Tico's rabbit. Alright, I'll tell you the method now. As for the people from Azrael, I'll go talk to them. They won't touch you for now. Gaydar and Sillin sat there and chatted, but no one around them could hear what Gaydar and Sillin were saying. Even if there was a listening device next to them, it wouldn't be able to pick up any sound. An hour later, Sillin rode his hoverboard back to the Vanguard area in exhaustion. The moment he got back, he fell asleep. Gaydar's method used up too much spiritual power. Practicing alone took up more than half of it. But even though it was very taxing, Sillin could still afford it once he got used to it. No wonder those who could get the shard without being found out were all strong. Ordinary people with rank A genes would definitely not be able to afford such an amount of mental power consumption. Hey, Sillin, what's wrong? Hui Mao jumped onto Sillin from the cat's nest of fish biscuits. Get down already, you smell like fish. Hui Mao stomped on Sillin a few times like he was venting his anger before jumping back into his nest. As expected, sleeping in a nest of fish biscuits was the best. Sillin lay on his bed and looked at Hui Mao who had crawled back into the fish biscuits. He began to think of a countermeasure. It was obvious that Hui Mao would be a good helper against Osculos, but whether or not he could be of any help was another question altogether. Just as Gaydar said, Azrael's men didn't come looking for Sillin, and the leaders' summit had begun. The summit ended after 5 whole days of meetings. No one except the participants knew exactly how many people had participated in the summit, or what the process was like. However, the division of Sector Z had been made public. There was no telling if there were some internal rules, but Ji Feng's division just so happened to include the planet where they mined the special energy ores. All in all, Ji Feng's division was pretty good. Of course, there were people who were satisfied, and there were people who were dissatisfied. The military didn't care what would happen to those who were dissatisfied. It was a matter of personal luck, and they had to accept it even if they were dissatisfied. If you want to fight, then go ahead. As long as you don't break the bottom line. Sillin left the big planet with the crowd and returned to a small planet in the satellite belt. After packing up a bit, they departed for their assigned division. The A Squadron's starships were at the vanguard, and the B Squadrons were at the rear. It was an impressive formation that was far more domineering than the 6th Division's solo operation. This was the true strength of the Big Four. At the same time, on an inconspicuous starship, Gaydar was talking to the person opposite him. Can that kid really succeed? The person sitting opposite Gaydar asked. Yes. Let's wait and see. Chapter 207. Inside the 6th B Squadron starship, Scylla stared at the string of characters displayed on the communicator in his hand. The characters were decoded to form a message, and it was from Hunting Blade Gada. Gadar was mainly trying to reassure Scylla that Azrael wouldn't come looking for Scylla just yet. Moreover, Osculos was being harassed by some military people as of late. He was a famous star-class Lone Ranger in the League of Stars, and anyone who knew Osculos would keep a close eye on him. Therefore, Scylla was safe for the time being, and Scylla had a buffer period. Scylla had always been curious about hunting knife Gadar. A Lone Ranger like him was second only to Osculos, and although Gadar claimed that he was injured by Osculos and was forced to recuperate in a prison at Sector S, Scylla thought that half of it was true and half false. Scylla believed that Osculos had injured him, but the fact that he was forced to recuperate at Sector S was a different story. The fact that Gadar survived Osculos' attack proved how strong he was. But at the same time, Scylla also thought about something else. Osculos was able to injure Gadar back then, but what about now? Gadar gave Scylla a very strange feeling. Scylla couldn't understand the man at all. Moreover, considering Osculos' temper, why did he change his mind at the last minute when he had set his sights on Scylla? It was all because of Gadar. Just how strong had Gadar become after all these years? The fact that Gadar was able to speak to Azrael alone was already an astounding level of influence. There was also his divination. Whether or not Gadar was telling the truth, Gadar was shrouded in a layer of fog. "Wah, we're here." Carrie's shout pulled Scylla back to reality. Everyone was very excited when they saw the image on the big screen. According to the star map, this was the area the Vanguard was assigned to. Zone ZJ, Sector Z, District J. In the next 10 years, this area would belong to Vanguard for mining resources. Next, the team did a detailed analysis of the general situation of this area and listed out the situation of each planet to facilitate their subsequent actions. After 10 days of rough collection, the A-team confirmed a relatively large planet with a Level A habitability. They named it Planet ZJ-100. Once ZJ-100 was confirmed, unless there was a special reason, this planet would always be the core planet of Sector J. Whether it was now or in the future, it would be returned to the military. After the central planet was confirmed, the 10B squadrons did not stop their exploration. With Planet ZJ-100 at the center of the division as the core, they spread out in 10 directions. The 10B squadrons would surround the central planet of ZJ-100 where the A squadrons were located and occupy a planet as a temporary stronghold. Then, they would develop the planet on their own. Finding a suitable planet as a temporary stronghold for the B squadrons wasn't as easy as it sounded. It would be great if they could find a Level A habitability planet, but if they couldn't, then they could only look for a Level B habitability planet. However, Level A habitability planets were extremely rare in Sector Z's universe to begin with, and the best one they could find was already a core planet. The communication network of Sector ZJ had already spread out. Coupled with the easing of the universe's environment, the communication between the B squadrons was pretty frequent. They all knew which B squadrons had found a suitable planet, and which B squadrons were still stuck at a standstill. As the exploration work continued, they kept hearing that some B squadrons had found a suitable planet. 2 of them were even lucky enough to find a Level A habitability planet. Although the 2 planets weren't big, it was enough to make the other B squadrons envious. Recently, everyone in the 6th Division had begun to grow impatient. This was because the 6th Division had yet to confirm a temporary stronghold planet. They hadn't found a Level A habitability planet, and they had only found 3 Level B habitability planets. These 3 planets were small in size, and their environments alone were enough to remove them from the candidate list. They weren't suitable to build a temporary stronghold on. As for Level C habitability planets, that was even less of a problem. Of course, there were more Level C planets, but who would build a temporary stronghold on a Level C habitability planet? If this was in the past, the squad members would have rushed over to inspect a Level C habitability planet like they were on steroids. But now, they weren't in the mood to look at Level C planets. The most important thing right now was to find a temporary stronghold. As for the other inspections and whatnot, they would only have the time and energy to do them after the temporary stronghold was built. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have a place to stay, and the squads who had already started building their stronghold were smiling at them. Who would have the mood to inspect a planet? On the main starship, Schotten and the technical crew were busy looking at the results sent back by the probes. The planets around them were either level C or level D. At the same time, these results would be shared with the squads after being processed by the technical crew so that everyone could understand the situation. Carey leaned against the back of his chair with a bitter expression as he looked at the results sent over by Schotten's main starship. He said dispiritedly, "Say, don't you think we're a little too unlucky? Otherwise, how could we have found those two underdeveloped level B planets by now?" Yudi glared at him and said, "It's already good enough that they're developing like that in this kind of environment." Carey snorted, "Are we really going to go back to those underdeveloped planets and build a stronghold in the end? No way, that's so embarrassing." Beaver looked at the summary of the information he had gathered over the past few days and said helplessly, "There's nothing we can do. Not every B squadron is so lucky." Carey turned his head and looked at the white fatty who was rolling around with the Miantuan at the corner of the wall. "Shueqiu, come over here and give Big Brother a pinch. It'll help vent some of my anger." Shueqiu heard Carey's words and immediately rolled out of the room. No matter how much Carey yelled at him, he pretended not to hear him. "Fuck, this white fatty is becoming more and more unlikable." "Carey, it's not that Shueqiu is unlikable, it's that your period is coming," Yudi said while stroking the Miantuan's tail that had jumped onto his knee. "You're the one who's on your period." Beaver heard the conversation between Carey and Yudi and shook his head. "Never mind, let them bicker all they want." He looked at the analysis data again and glanced at the scene outside on the big screen. They were about to pass by a C-grade planet. The surface area of the planet was not bad, but according to the data from the probes, it was not suitable for landing. How good could a planet with a C-grade habitability be? Many people thought the same as Beaver, so the 6th Division's starship had no intention of stopping. However, as they got closer and closer to the C-grade planet, Huimao, who was sleeping on Silen's shoulder, suddenly opened his eyes and his ears perked up. "What's wrong?" Silen asked when he saw Huimao's reaction. "Something's wrong. That planet. Something's wrong." Huimao stared at the image displayed on the big screen. His gaze landed on the planet that had been identified as C-grade habitability. "What's wrong?" Huimao did not speak, but Silen saw Huimao's pupils dilate and contract into the shape of swords. Something that could interest Huimao so much, Silen immediately connected to Schotten's communicator. "Commander, please stop the starship for a moment. Something's come up." "What is it?" Schotten asked. Right now Schotten was not in a good mood either. After all, the 6th B Squadron had not made any progress until now, and Schotten was the one who drew lots to decide the sailing direction and route of each B Squadron. Now that they had not encountered any good planets along the way, the members were all starting to complain in their hearts. Therefore, the pressure on Schotten was considerable. "I've discovered something. I want to take a look at the planet that has been appraised as a rank C habitability planet," Celine told him her thoughts directly. Schotten frowned and fell silent for a moment. Then, he said, "Sure. How much support do you need?" "No need. Wheeze, Cheto, and I are enough. I'll give you 3 hours. If you find nothing, come back immediately." "All right." Some of the technicians complained after Schotten ordered the starship to stop, but Schotten didn't say anything. Since they had chosen to trust Silen, they had to endure the pressure. Carey wanted to go with Silen, but Silen turned him down. Instead, he piloted a small spaceplane and flew over with Huimao and Cheto. The air on this planet was very thin, so the cosmic rays were very strong and the air itself was harmful to human breathing. That was why Silen walked out of the spaceplane wearing a protective suit. Huimao was the one who pointed out the landing spot. Hui Mao and Cheto were very comfortable. After walking out of the space plane, Hui Mao kept running in a certain direction. Cheto didn't notice anything unusual on the starship, but his eyes flashed after he stepped out of the space plane. It was obvious that he was doing a deep scan of the area. This place looked like a plain, but there were some small hills here and there. There weren't any tall mountains at all. Hui Mao looked very excited. It wasn't because he was excited about food, but because he had found something fun. Normal scanning devices were useless in this place, and Silen's biomonitor didn't show anything at all. Not even their vitals showed anything. It was obvious that there was something wrong with this place. Fortunately, Cheto was still functioning normally. He was able to transmit some images to the starship through him. Although the images were a little disjointed, they were still visible enough for the people on the starship to see what was going on. Silen's running footsteps came to a halt as he looked around. He could feel a lot of eyes watching them from the shadows. There are high-level alien life forms nearby. Cheto said. There are, but we don't know what they are. Silen looked around once before continuing forward with Hui Mao. On the starship, Shoten and the technicians couldn't believe what Silen and Cheto were saying. According to the data detected by the probes, there weren't any high-level life forms on this planet. There were microbes, but most of them lived in extreme environments. There were also some low-level single-celled organisms, and plants were more like low-level life forms. Hui Mao clearly didn't care about the gazes. Instead, he lowered his head and sniffed here and there. He looked very happy. There's something down here. It's an electronic device. It's huge. Hui Mao turned around and said to Silen excitedly. How big is it? Silen asked. The place we landed, the places we passed, and the places we're stepping on right now extend all the way to the distance. It's about 1/5 of the planet's surface. Silen narrowed his eyes. Although he had sensed something unusual after he arrived on this planet, his senses weren't as sensitive as Hui Mao's. He didn't know what it was, and he couldn't estimate the range of the sensation. Still, he was surprised to hear Hui Mao's words. Right now, he had a vague feeling that someone had come to this planet a long time ago, and they had made a huge commotion and left some things behind. Shoten had heard Hui Mao's words too. The news was shocking, but he didn't doubt Hui Mao's judgment. In other words, there was something on this planet that was interfering with the probes. If that was the case, the data they detected would be rendered useless. Silen, don't move yet. I'll send someone to. Before Shoten could finish, a few black shadows appeared on the screen. Silen stared at the figures walking out from behind the protruding hills and took out his gun. What is that? A technician gulped and asked. Since it was night time on the other side, they couldn't see what exactly it was from the image Cheto sent back. They could only see a rough outline. It was about 2 meters tall, and it looked like a standing scorpion. In short, it was definitely not a human. Send a squad to the rescue immediately. The hair on Shoten's back was standing on end. This planet was really strange. Right now, he was regretting sending Silen out. The creatures gradually increased in number and surrounded Silen's group. They formed an encirclement and gradually shrunk. With the help of the dim starlight, Silen was able to see the appearance of these monsters clearly. Their mouths were triangular in shape, and they had several pairs of fangs. There were 3 pairs of pincers on their abdomens, and 3 pairs of feet with sharp claws were nailed to the ground. There was even a curled tail behind them. The surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped a lot since the appearance of these creatures. Hui Mao still didn't look at the creatures. Instead, he kept walking in circles, thinking about something. Wheeze, there's an enemy. What do we do? Silen asked in a low voice. These creatures were definitely not easy to deal with, and there were so many of them. The spaceplane was still some distance away, and the situation was very bad for Silen. Moreover, he was the only human here, so he was the target of everyone. Silen was going crazy at Hui Mao's calmness. In response to Silen's low roar, Huimao only flicked his ears and stopped spinning. Strings of green characters quickly flashed across his eyes. Silen and Cheto stood back to back, ready to deal with the creatures that were approaching them step by step. "Yah!" A sharp roar broke the silence. This was the sound of a monster walking at the very front. It should be their leader. After the sharp roar, the creatures finally sped up and charged towards Silen. His shoulder cannon, wrist blade, and combination laser gun were all ready. But just as Silen was about to fight, the monsters suddenly stopped in their tracks and let out a low growl with unknown meaning. "Yah!" It was another roar, but from the tone, it was clearly different from the previous one. After the roar, the creatures that were already 7 or 8 meters away from Silen's group slowly retreated, and the reinforcements Shotten had sent gradually appeared in the sky. "Reinforcements, don't come over yet. Don't open fire," Silen said hurriedly. Just now, Huimao had sent him a message. The things underground were coming out. After receiving Silen's order, the fighters and spaceplanes that were flying above Silen's group didn't land immediately. They were already here anyway, and they would open fire at the slightest movement. "Lieutenant, what's going on?" Before Carey could finish his sentence, he was stunned by the commotion below him. Everyone's reaction was about the same. Boom boom boom, the ground started shaking. The creatures swiftly left the area and vanished without a trace in no time at all. It was just like how they had arrived earlier. Silen and Cheto didn't move. Huimao had told them that there was no danger here. As the ground shook, the rocks and dust on the surface of the protruding hills were shaken off. Then, they lit up at the same time. For a time, the darkness of the night was brightly illuminated. The people on the starship were also stunned by the scene. The light was especially eye-catching in the darkness after passing through the thin atmosphere. Even without Cheto's image, the people on the starship could see it clearly from space. What did this mean? It meant that someone had come here and built these facilities before. Judging from the current situation, these facilities had been here for quite some time already. Who on earth built these facilities? Was the person who built these facilities related to the planet where the army was stationed? The technicians on the starship couldn't help but feel excited when they thought of this. The ground didn't stop shaking even after the protruding hills had lit up. It wasn't until a quarter-spherical building rose up from where Huimao was standing. The building was about 15 meters tall. After it rose into the air, Huimao stared at it while green strings of characters flashed in his eyes. Cheto cut off the image transmission with the starship and began analyzing the rising building. Huimao was decoding it, and Cheto was learning how to do it. It was a rare opportunity to learn such knowledge from a cyborg. Silen stared at the building. He knew that Huimao was talking to this, or rather, the giant machine underground. Although Silen couldn't talk to it himself, he could see the machine language and the communication between Huimao and the building. He didn't understand it. He could only see a little bit. 2 minutes later, a quarter of the spherical building opened towards the fan-shaped section where Silen and the others were. The next year, it was changed into a passageway. "Let's go. It's just the few of us. The rest of you can wait outside. Entering without permission will only result in death." Huimao walked into the passageway with his tail raised. Silen and Cheto followed behind Huimao. Huimao's words were obviously meant for the 6th Division. The people who were about to land and enter the passageway were dumbfounded. "Commander, what do you think?" A team member asked Shotten directly. "Let's wait around and do as it says. Silen will send us a message soon," Shotten said. "Alright, that's all we can do for now. Use this time to look around and find the monsters' nests. The second group will arrive at the planet in a bit." After Shotten made some arrangements, he boarded the aircraft and went with the second group of people to the planet that had previously been identified as a C-class habitable planet. Things didn't seem to be as they had imagined. Chapter 208. Sillin and Cheto followed Hui Mao into the building. There was a lighting device inside. The area they passed through would automatically light up, and it would only be extinguished after Sillin and the others had completely passed through. It was obvious that the original owner of this place was a conservationist. It didn't take long for them to see an elevator. The doors opened on their own when they approached it, and Hui Mao walked in first. Sillin followed suit without hesitation. The doors of the elevator closed and began to descend. After Sillin and Cheto had entered the elevator, all the lights inside the building were turned off. The only illumination left was a small hill that protruded out of the building's exterior. Other than the noise caused by the 6th Division spaceplanes and fighter jets, there was only the faint rustling of the wind. Shoten and the others found this strange. If they hadn't seen those monsters before, they would have suspected that there weren't any high-level lifeforms here. They had searched so many places, but they couldn't find even the shadow of those monsters. It was as if they had evaporated into thin air. Did they burrow into the ground? A technician asked. It's very likely, but the detectors can't detect the situation below the ground. It doesn't match reality no matter how hard they try, said another technician with a troubled expression while looking at the scan. We can't use these detectors, so we can only rely on our men to search for them. For the time being, Shoten did not let his squad members go down. After all, there were unknown dangers below, and the planet's environment was very harmful to the human body. It was very inconvenient for people wearing protective suits to move around, and if those monsters were to come out and attack them all at once, it would be terrible. Therefore, Shoten could not take this risk. He could only hope that Sillin could send a message over as soon as possible. Sillin and Hui Mao walked out of the elevator. There were several tunnels in front of them, and the elevator was located at the intersection of these tunnels. Hui Mao's goal was very clear. He didn't hesitate after exiting the elevator, and he didn't explain too much to Sillin. He simply walked in a certain direction without hesitation. Looking at the construction of these passageways, Sillin did not think that they were built by a super civilization. In fact, although these passageways were considered solid and reliable, in terms of technology, they were not as advanced as some bases in the League of Stars. Turning left and right, Sillin saw some individual rooms, meeting rooms, big dining halls and even big auditoriums, but he didn't stop moving. Right now, Whis was running faster and faster, and it looked like it was in a better mood than before. It was even shouting as it ran. Sigma. I'm coming. Come out and welcome us. Sigma. Who's Sigma? Sillin looked to the front. There were no people or animals. Hubie Lu, nice to meet you. As an excited voice sounded, an opening suddenly opened in the wall in front of them, and a robot came out. If they saw this robot on the streets of the 10 trade sectors outside of Sector Z, they would definitely be laughed at for being an old antique, old, ugly and outdated. However, the robot that appeared here made Celine feel special. Looking at its appearance alone, this robot looked a little retro. Unlike Cheto's humanoid appearance and smooth movements, this robot didn't even have legs. Its cylindrical torso was a hemispherical thing that could roll in any direction. Its head was also a hemisphere connected to its torso, and a blue bar of light swept around it. This blue bar was probably its eyes. What was so special about this robot called Sigma? It had a head and legs that looked like a tumbler. His tone, his movements, and the change in the blue bar when he spoke. Its tone was very natural, and it sounded exactly the same as a human's. When it said that it was happy to see Whis, the blue light on its blue bar turned into a wavy shape, and it probably meant something similar to a human smile. Moreover, the worst part was that the bastard was waving its hands up and down like a fledgling flapping its wings when it was running. Hui Mao was so happy that he was running circles around Sigma, and Sigma was running circles around it. Even Sillin was feeling a little dizzy. Say, why don't you two take a break? Sillin asked. Sigma looked up at Sillin and Cheto behind Sillin. Then, it let out a wah and waved its arms a couple of times around Cheto and Sillin. The aura of a kindred. Sigma was so happy that the blue bar on its face turned into a giant wave. The corner of Silen's mouth twitched. This robot's personality was similar to a child's. It was obvious that Huimao had been communicating with this robot all this time. After circling around Silen and Cheto a couple of times, Sigma stopped in front of Silen. Its blue bar turned into a question mark. You're a human. But why do I sense the aura of a kindred? Sigma asked. Huimao jumped onto Sigma's hemispherical head and introduced Silen and Cheto briefly. Silen is a weirdo, but all you need to do is treat him as one of us. Don't worry too much about him. Alright. Sigma classified Huimao, Silen, and Cheto as one of their own. Then, he said to Silen, the air composition and environment here have changed, so you can take off your protective suit now, Silen. Cheto didn't object to Sigma's suggestion. He had already measured the temperature, air pressure, humidity, and composition of the air. It was perfectly in line with human standards, so there was no need for him to wear a protective suit. This change only started when Sigma classified Silen as one of their own. The environment changed very quickly, and it only took a few seconds for it to change completely. Silen took off his protective suit and sucked in a breath of air. The oxygen and carbon dioxide levels were pretty good. Come here, I'll show you around this base. Sigma waved at them and started walking, rolling, forward. Silen was very curious as to how it rolled, but when he saw that the exposed hemisphere representing its feet had turned into a tooth shape similar to that of the stairs when it climbed up a flight of stairs, and then climbed up step by step, he understood that the hemisphere representing its feet could change its state. Silen heard Huimao mention that the underground base was huge, but unlike other bases, this one was well equipped. It was almost like a perfect underground world, and there was even a large man-made lake. Have you always been here alone, Sigma? Silen asked. Sigma's voice suddenly turned sad. Yeah, it's so boring. I have no choice but to enter hibernation. I won't wake up unless an outsider shows up. What about those non-humans outside? We saw them before we came. Oh, you mean Lovag and the others? They are the guardian beasts that guard this base. When there are no outsiders on the planet, they will enter a dormant state. Once an outsider invades, they will wake up and attack the outsiders. Lovag? Silen was a little confused. He had never heard of the word before, nor did he know what it meant. Lovag means night. Master created them to protect this base like a knight. Which sector's language is it from? Silen asked. It's not from here. It's from my homeland. Sigma's tone grew even sadder. You're not from the League of Stars, are you a robot? Nope. Where's your master? He's not. Yes, Master was the one who brought me here. After Master and the others left, he asked me to stay here and guard this place, Sigma said in a sobbing tone. I was asked to stay by the little miss and the others. To tell you the truth, I really miss them. Master said that I can't leave the base to look for them unless the shortcut is opened one day. A shortcut. Olilo's cage, the shortcut to new life. It was the same type of star map fragments Silen possessed. As expected, Sigma's master was the one who left Olilo behind. Sigma was like a defenseless child. It answered everything Silen asked, and this was mainly because of Wheeze. Then, it treated Silen and the others as one of their own, and that was why it answered almost all of their questions. It didn't take long for Silen to learn everything he needed. Silen, Sigma said that we can use this base. Huimao jumped onto Silen's shoulder. Really? Silen looked at Sigma. Yes. Master said that you can use this base as long as I approve of you. I approve of you. From Sigma's tone, it sounded more like he was excited to find a playmate in the future. Aren't your master coming back? Nope. Even if he does, he won't use this base. This used to be Master's old base, but he moved it. According to Sigma, Sigma's master had relocated his base to the planet where the military was currently stationed. Do you want a base? Do you? Sigma's blue bars turned into two big circles and looked at Sigma expectantly. Of course. This abandoned base would save the 6th Division a lot of resources and energy. Moreover, according to Sigma, this base had always been in a state of stagnation. There's one problem. This planet's environment isn't good enough. We can't stay underground forever, can we? Silen thinks said with some regret. That's not a problem. Sigma circled around Silen once before pointing a finger at him. Number 1, this base was originally above ground, but I had to go into hibernation and let it sink underground. So, when your master built the base, it was on the ground, and then you sank the base? How did you manage such a big project? Because I was bored. I didn't have anything to do anyway, Sigma said. Silen's words were full of vicissitudes. A robot left alone in an old base. What an inspirational story. Sigma's voice was filled with joy as he raised another finger and said, my second question. This planet has been modified over a long period of time, and its environment can be adjusted. One of the reasons why the base was built to cover such a large area is that it can affect the entire planet's environment and air composition. Sigma's voice was filled with joy. It can be changed? Silen exclaimed in surprise. Of course. It can change the atmosphere, air composition, and air pressure within an hour. That's how it used to be. Before Master left, everyone could do whatever they wanted. The blue bars on Sigma's face floated upward as if reminiscing. Silen rubbed his chin and beckoned Sigma with a finger. What? What's your decision? Sigma immediately leaned toward him. After discussing a few things with Sigma, Silen told Sigma to keep the shortcut a secret for the time being. Once everything was ready and their testimony was checked, Silen finally allowed Sigma to start reorganizing the base. Outside the planet's surface. Inside the spaceplane, Shotten stared at the planet's surface on the screen. It was desolate and devoid of life. There was water and low-level flora and fauna on the planet, but they didn't add much life to the planet, and there were only a few of them. It made the planet look lonely and pitiful. While Shotten was thinking about something, Silen's communicator connected. What's the situation? Shotten asked. You'll know in a moment, Captain. For now, have everyone go to the sky and don't leave anyone near the ground. I'll show you what we got in 2 minutes. Silen's tone was very certain. Although Shotten was puzzled, he temporarily suppressed his doubts and ordered everyone to go to the sky. Once everything was ready, everyone stared at the scene below. The people on the starship also stared unblinkingly at the image on the screen. The glowing hills on the planet's surface grew brighter and brighter. Then, the ground began to shake even more violently than before. Even the rocks and sand on the surface were pushed away. Then, the base that had been hidden underground for hundreds of years finally saw the light of day again. Everyone in the 6th Division stared blankly at the magnificent building that stretched as far as the eye could see. The base gradually grew taller and taller. The surrounding area was completely covered in sand, but above the sand, the high-rise building of the base looked like a leader, guiding the underground parts of the base upward. An hour later, as the sand layer gradually dissipated, everyone finally saw the underground giant under the illumination of the hill-like light. It looked like an earth dragon bursting out of the ground. It was as solemn as a military fortress. See. Silen. Shotten's voice sounded a little hoarse. He seemed to know what was going to happen next. His heart rate sped up subconsciously, and he couldn't find his composure just yet. Wait, Captain. We'll talk later. What else? Shotten and the others held their breaths. They stared at the situation on the ground. 1 minute, nothing. 5 minutes later, there was still nothing. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, Silen, what's going on? There's no movement. Shotten finally couldn't help but ask. It was rare for the 6th Division captain to be so impatient. Before Scylla could answer, some of the technicians on the starship excitedly told Shotten, "Captain, the planet's atmosphere has thickened." According to the monitoring data sent back by the detector, the planet's habitability is changing from C-class to B-class habitability. In other words, this giant could change the planet to B-class habitability. It could also change it to C-class habitability. Who would have the ability to do so? Thump thump, thump thump, Shotten could hear his own heartbeat and warm blood flowing through his veins. Finally, Scylla's voice came to Shotten. "Captain, the transformation is complete. There's no need to wear the protective suit now." Following Scylla's voice, a flat landing field appeared in the base. It was practically a temporary port. Good, good. Shotten landed the spaceplane on the ground and stepped out of it. He didn't wear the protective suit. The base's purification had calmed down the sand and dust. Now, the proportion of the various elements in the air was the standard, and the temperature was only slightly colder. For hunters like Shotten and the others, this was nothing more than normal. Scylla was already waiting at one of the landing field's entrances. When he saw Shotten, he briefly explained the base to him and then introduced Sigma to him. After listening to Scylla's explanation, Shotten's first words were, "Are you willing to join the 6th Division?" What followed was a string of child abduction excuses that turned the blue light on Sigma's face into a dizzying circle. Sigma didn't know what decision to make, so it turned to Huimao. "Hubeilu, are you a member of Vanguard Division 6? "Of course. I'm still a core combatant," Huimao said while looking up from Scylla's shoulder. "Core combatant my ass." Not far away, Carrie curled his lips. However, Carrie and the others' reactions weren't within Sigma's consideration. It only accepted the opinions of its own people. Little did they know that Huimao was also abducted by Scylla. Every member of the 6th Division went crazy when they saw the fortress that covered 1/5 of the entire planet. It was a blessing in disguise. The A Squadron allowed the B Squadrons to move freely, choose freely, and build their own temporary strongholds. This was also a test of the ability of the B Squadrons. Every once in a while, someone from the A Squadron would visit the temporary strongholds of the B Squadrons for inspection. Shotten was already looking forward to the A Squad's arrival. He couldn't help but wonder how they would react when they saw this magnificent sight. Sigma was more than happy to see the 6th Division move in, but the first problem they had to solve was compatibility. Lovag was a guardian beast herd with a chip inside its body, so Sigma needed to modify the chip's information so that both sides could live in harmony with each other. Back when the base was still underground, the guardian beast's food came from the nutrient fluid stored in the underground base. Since the nutrient fluid was limited, the guardian beasts would go underground and hibernate whenever no one was around. But now, the 6th Division didn't mind sacrificing a lot of food just to get along with the guardian beasts. Since they decided to set up a temporary stronghold on this planet, the first thing they had to do was build a satellite defense network. That being said, it had nothing to do with Huimao. Right now, Huimao was very conflicted because he noticed that Scylla, Cheto, and Sigma all started with the word she. Does that mean I'm being ostracized? No, I can't be too different. But do I really have to change it to Hubeilu? That sounds so bad. Chapter 209. Right now, the 6th Division was so busy that they could barely breathe. However, everyone was so excited that they were willing to work as hard as they could. At first, they thought that they would have to build a temporary base on 2 underdeveloped B-rank habitable planets, and they were even prepared to be laughed at by the B squadrons ahead of them. But who would have thought that things would take such a huge turn? Thanks to this, Scylla's influence in the 6th Division grew even greater. Many of the team members would mention that Shotten would be replaced by Scylla as the commander of the 6th Division during private conversations. Scylla was still very young, and Shotten was in the prime of his life. Judging from the current situation, Shotten couldn't be promoted to the A Squadron in the short term, so they only talked about it when they had nothing to do with each other. Scylla had talked to Diaz once about this rumor. No one knew what Silen and Diaz talked about, and the two didn't behave strangely after the conversation, so no one paid it any attention. Sigma explained the situation of the base to the technical team one by one, and then left them to figure it out on their own. The childish bastard didn't have the patience to stay with the technicians all day. After a heated discussion about the base's defense network, they finally decided to build a 3-layer defense network. The first layer was the defense network built by the technical team. The second layer was the defense network built by Yudi, Beaver, and Silen. The third layer was the one-track defense network that existed to begin with. The last layer was the base's foundation, and it wouldn't be manipulated by anyone. Of course, this anyone didn't include Sigma. Yudi and Beaver had built a database based on the data Silen brought back from Sector S's prison. At the same time, they upgraded the defense network and developed a new defense network. However, the technical team didn't agree with Yudi and Beaver's new defense network. That was why the 3-layer defense network was created. Sigma didn't mind setting up 3 layers of defense as long as they didn't destroy the base. Apart from that, they could do whatever they wanted. Recently, some of the members of the 6th Squad had been familiarizing themselves with the Lovag guardian beasts. Although these genetically engineered beasts looked ferocious, their personalities were not what they appeared to be. They only had one bottom line, and that was not to destroy the base. Therefore, these ferocious-looking Lovag guardian beasts were actually loyal to the base. If outsiders attacked, these guardian beasts would fight until they died. To the people of the 6th Division, this was undoubtedly good news. At the very least, the Lovag guardian beasts would not betray them. From a certain point of view, these simple-minded creatures were very cute. Silen observed for a moment. After more than 20 days, the Lovag guardian beasts were showing signs of reproducing. If their food supply was stable, the second batch of Lovag guardian beasts would arrive soon. When the second generation of Lovag's guardian beasts arrived, Sigma would implant them with a chip similar to the one implanted in the first generation. They would work together to defend the base. Recently, Sigma had been very happy to have a large group of playmates, unlike the dormant Lovag guardian beasts in the past. As a result, Sigma, Shuecho, and the others could often be seen running around the base like crazy. What a child who's been holding back for so long. To everyone's surprise, however, Huimao had always been quiet and spacing out. Today, Silen, Yudi, and Beaver were conducting the final inspection of the second layer of defense network. Let's take a break. We're tired from all the work we've done. The last bit will only take 3 hours, and we'll still have time to eat dinner with everyone, Beaver said while wiping the sweat off his face. Then let's rest. I'm hungry too. Silen took out some food from his bag and told everyone to fill their stomachs. They hadn't made it in time for the inspection of the defense network. Say, Wheeze, why don't you go out and play with them? Yudi asked Huimao. He knew that the Miantuan was nowhere to be seen as of late because it was playing with Sigma, Shuecho, and the others. Wheeze's been spacing out a lot lately, Beaver said. The cat had been sitting next to them and watching them inspect the network for days. I'm meditating. Huimao was furious. Spacing out and meditating were two completely different concepts. While it was true that the cat spent most of its time spacing out, it was still meditating a lot of the time. Silen flicked Huimao's ears. Fine. What are you meditating about? Huimao's ears twitched, but he didn't say anything. Silen and the others didn't rush him either. 10 minutes later, Huimao finally couldn't hold it in any longer and said, I'm thinking if I should change my name. Isn't your name pretty good? You named it yourself, didn't you? Silen knew about the cat's narcissism. But, Huimao raised a paw and bent the tip, Silen, Cheto, and Sigma all start with the word she, so I'm thinking if I should add a she in front of my name. There's no need, Silen said. Besides, my surname isn't she. That's right. Huimao's eyes suddenly lit up. It was true that Silen's surname wasn't she. Silen said that his surname was Yuan, so it didn't matter what came after it as long as it wasn't his surname. Huimao's thoughts were very simple, so it didn't take long to figure it out. It was at this moment Sigma and the others came over to invite Huimao out to play. Xueqiu was lying on Sigma's back. Tang Qiuqiu couldn't carry him like she used to because the white fatty was gaining weight at an insane rate. Although Tang Qiuqiu couldn't carry him, and the other members of the 6th squad didn't want to either, Sigma could. In fact, he didn't feel any pressure at all. The Miantuan was lying on top of Sigma's head and giggling happily. Hurry up, Wheeze. Carrie wants to duel us. Xueqiu tilted his head to the side and said. Huimao happened to be in a good mood, so he asked excitedly, that kid wants to duel us? What kind of duel? Duel in the air. Sigma answered immediately. The long, wavy lines on his face showed just how excited he was right now. Duel in the air? Silen looked at them and asked, he's flying a fighter? Yeah, Carrie said he'll be flying a fighter. Oh, and maybe Yudo's too. Xueqiu pulled at his ears and laughed. Then how are you going to fly up there? Beaver asked. I can fly by myself. Sigma's hemispherical body slowly changed shape and floated up into the air. It was very agile in this small space. If Sigma can fly, then what about you kids? Are you going to lie on it like you are now? Silen asked. Of course not. Xueqiu raised his head. We have love egg. Huimao's eyes flashed when he heard this. Silen thought, this cat is up to no good again. Are there no stakes? Huimao asked. Stakes? Sigma scratched its head and only put its hand down when it touched the Miantuan. Clearly, it didn't know what stakes meant. Huimao, Xueqiu, and the Miantuan shared a look. They all knew what Sigma was thinking, and they all laughed sinisterly. Alright, this time we're going to lose everything in that Carrie bastard's cabinet until there's nothing left of him. The gray cat shouted. Yeah, we're going to make sure he loses everything in his cabinet. Silen and the other two thought to themselves as they watched the guys leave. Loveag's guardian beast can fly. Yudi narrowed his eyes. I think so, according to them, Beaver said. No one knew about this. Should we go check it out? Silen looked at the rest of the work. We can't delay this. Are you sure you can come back in an hour? Beaver shook his head. Forget it. Let's finish the inspection first. The three immediately got to work. Although they were working faster, they didn't slack off. What was supposed to take 3 hours was now done in 1.5 hours. After packing up their tools, Silen and the other two walked out of the base. There were quite a lot of people outside the base. They were all watching the battle, cheering and roaring from time to time. Of course, the cheers were for Huimao and the others. Many of them were making fun of Carrie. Yudos, hurry up and come help us. Carrie was almost going crazy in his fighter. These guys are so hard to deal with. His observation window was filled with the thick layer of mud bombs thrown by Xueqiu and the others. It was easy to see how badly Carrie was getting beaten up. When Carrie's fighter was hit by a mud bomb, the people below it roared in unison. Carrie was so angry that smoke was rising from his forehead. In the end, he couldn't help but ask Yudos to come up and share the firepower. When Silen and the others went out, Yudos happened to be flying his fighter. Carrie was caught in a pincer attack from 3 sides. 2 Loveags were carrying Xueqiu and Huimao, the Miantuan was with Huimao, and Sigma was on the other side. Sigma was as excited as a child that had just been let out to play. Xueqiu and Huimao weren't easy to deal with, and the Miantuan would occasionally toss mud bombs at them. Those Loveags are pretty agile in the air, Yudi said. It was true that if we hadn't contacted Sigma and opened the underground base to them, the reinforcements they sent might not have been able to come out on top. No one knew that these guys could fly at the time, not to mention that they couldn't fly at all. There was an opening on each side of the Loveag's back. Before this, Scylla didn't think that they were wings. After all, these guys looked too similar to terrestrial insects. But now it seemed that Sigma's master had thought things through. If Scylla's guess was right, these love eggs could move freely in the water. They were the product of genetic engineering. In their natural state, there were very few creatures that could do everything in the air, on land, and in water. These love eggs were very qualified to be guardians. Yudo's fighter took off some of Carrie's firepower, but Sigma was clearly more excited than Huimao. Just like Huimao, its mud bombs were incredibly accurate. Although the interval between each throw was short, and it didn't seem like it was aimed, it had actually done thousands of calculations and threw them according to the most likely trajectory. Scylla had been studying Sigma all this time. Although most of the robots in the League of Stars looked similar to humans on the outside, most of them were still mechanized on the inside. The Robert family had improved their robots a lot and made them more human-like and intelligent. Cheto, on the other hand, was closer to a human than the Robert family's robots. However, Cheto's thinking was only superior compared to the Robert family's robots. Compared to Sigma, Cheto's thinking was a little more human-like. A human's thinking wasn't perfect, and there were always so many flaws in a person's personality. Some were childish, and some were deep. Sigma was more like a child than a human. The only difference was that Sigma was wearing a robot's skin. Sigma would get nervous when it was in an emergency, but it would show its mood on its face when it encountered something fun. Cheto, on the other hand, was more like an adult who had experienced the world. A robot like Sigma was the most carefree choice for its creator, and very few people paid attention to a childish robot like Sigma. Sigma didn't have a liquid crystal nuclear brain or a central chip, but Scylla's research revealed that there was something similar to a human brain inside its brain. It was a discovery that shocked Scylla to no end. What kind of person was the creator of Sigma? To think that the creator actually treated Sigma like a human. The more Scylla learned about Sigma's way of thinking, the more interested he became in Sigma's birthplace. The technological civilization there wasn't necessarily much higher than the League of Stars's, but each had their own strengths. At the very least, they were a little more unique than the League of Stars when it came to the creation of robots. When would the shortcut be completed? In the end, Carrie lost everything in his storage cabinet, and Yudo's lost a third of his stock. When the battle was over, Huimao and Shueqiu split the spoils, and the two love eggs came over to join in the fun. After all, they had a share in the victory, so they squealed happily after getting the food and crawled back into the underground cave. This incident caused Huimao and the love eggs to volunteer themselves whenever there was an exciting duel, but no one in the 6th Division was stupid enough to compete with them again. After the temporary base was built, they had to send people to collect energy ores from planets with energy signatures they detected during the search for suitable planets. Energy reserves were essential for the survival of the base. Other than that, they also had to collect food and go hunting. The food grown in the base was just the beginning, and it wasn't enough to supply the daily needs of the entire 6th Division. Scylla and the love eggs were going to search for energy ores and food, but Sigma couldn't leave. It had to stay at the base. The love eggs couldn't leave either. This was their base, and they wouldn't leave even if they died. The good news was that the base was covered by the network, so Huimao told Cheto to send the footage to Sigma. Sigma wasn't interested in energy ores, but it was interested in mining them. Therefore, while Scylla and the others were mining the energy ores, Sigma was staring at the big screen in envy. Why wasn't it the mining machine that they were talking about? On the mining planet, Scylla and the love eggs came across some nutritious plants that could be used as food. All they had to do was remove the poison sac from their bodies. Scylla even demonstrated the process to Sigma, causing the love eggs to move their fingers as if they were touching the plants themselves. While Sigma was watching the footage intently, a squeak suddenly came from behind. It was a 10-centimeter tall newborn love eggs. Adult love eggs didn't come into the base often, and they rarely came after the 6th Division arrived. But this newborn love eggs was different. Sigma had implanted a chip into it after it was born. Without the chip, the love eggs were considered idiots and retards. But after the chip was implanted, the love eggs were no different from children. They were curious about everything and often moved around Sigma. In its core consciousness, Sigma was the safest character. Little love eggs had poked its head out to look for Sigma's movements, but it noticed that Sigma hadn't gone out to play as of late. That was why it came over. Little love eggs jumped onto Sigma's arm. Although its pincers were small, they were very strong and attached to Sigma's arm. Meow. Little love eggs are here. Hui Mao and the others greeted little love eggs. Yeah, little love eggs were very happy to see them. They jumped on Sigma's arm to express their excitement. Silen didn't interrupt Hui Mao and the others' video chat with Sigma. He cleaned the plants in his hand and collected some seeds. At the same time, he collected the poisonous sacs inside the plants. These were very rare medicines. This planet was very strange. Its habitability was between C and B rank. Places with dense vegetation didn't require protective clothing, but places with sparse vegetation did. There were energy ores in places with sparse vegetation, and some people were mining them. Right now, Silen was in a place with dense vegetation. The reason why Silen thought this planet was strange wasn't because of its habitability. It was because there were no animals on this planet. There were a lot of highly evolved plants, but not a single animal. Not even a small insect could be seen. The evolution of the species on this planet was clearly different from other planets. Without animals, the competition between the plants was very fierce. They had evolved all kinds of methods. If a tree couldn't move, it would be strangled by the vines. The vines would pierce their thorns into the tree trunk to absorb nutrients. However, although the vines could climb up quickly, they moved horizontally very slowly. As long as the tree moved slightly, it would break free from the vines. If the vines were too tight, and the tree moved too hard, the vines would break, and the vines would wither. There was also a kind of fruit that looked like a pomegranate. When in danger, the top of the fruit would open and spit out the seeds inside one by one. When Silen came over, he was attacked by these fruits. At the same time, Silen also saw one of the vines that had extended towards the fruit being shot by the bullets the fruit spat out. This was a very strange place. Chapter 210. A lot of hallucinogenic gases and other toxic gases would be released in places where plants and animals intertwined, causing the animals in the plants to collapse. However, in this forest of plants, there weren't many of these high-risk toxic gases released. Instead, the toxins were stored inside the plants. The toxins were stored inside the plants, and when hostile species of plants encountered each other, they would release the toxins in their bodies, cutting through the epidermis of the plant and seeping in. Some toxins could even liquefy the hostile species and turn them into fertilizer for their own growth. Some of the arbor plants here were not completely stationary. Many of them could move. Although most of them could not move as fast as a tortoise, compared to the plants on other planets, the plants here were already very special. Many of the plants contained a variety of precious medicines. Medicines that were directly isolated from the plants contained a considerable amount of activity and were much more effective than those synthesized by machines. Moreover, some allergies and rejection reactions could be avoided. Therefore, in the League of Stars, natural medicines that were isolated from plants were worth hundreds of times more than synthetic medicines. All of this came as a pleasant surprise to Tico and Riculab. From a few plants, they easily extracted hallucinogens and other neurotoxins that were of high purity and activity. Tico and Lycrabe had been busy ever since they arrived. They usually didn't rely on robots to process the materials, and they usually did it themselves. The medicinal ingredients that they collected were indeed worth the trip. These medicinal ingredients were all rare natural ingredients, and 2 of them could only be found by chance. In the League of Stars, the price of these ingredients was comparable to a starship. There was also a type of evergreen shrub that grew in clusters. Its leaves and branches contained a chemical ingredient that was often used by hunters as an analgesic. It could be used to treat high fevers caused by infection. However, many synthetic drugs had high side effects. After the analgesic was administered, there would be a period of weakness. However, the side effects of this naturally extracted analgesic drug were minimal, and its biological activity was very good. This was the conclusion that Tycho and Lycrabe came to based on their own experience. To them, this place was indeed a treasure trove. Tycho and Lycrabe had already marked this planet, and in the next few years, it would probably become their herb garden. The white rabbit was nibbling on the leaves of some unknown plant with its three-petaled mouth. Many animals had an innate intuition and could sense what they could eat and what they couldn't. Seeing Tycho's expression, it was obvious that she believed in this white rabbit's ability. Hui Mao and the others gathered some nuts that could be stored for a long time and some fleshy fruits. I kept a video feed of Sigma while I was harvesting, so Sigma was able to see their every move, comment on them from time to time, and eavesdrop on them. Those animals obviously didn't care if there were any poisonous gases or plant secretions here. At least for now, these guys were still full of energy and were jumping around. Scarlet Wind grabbed a fruit and sniffed it before starting to eat it. Wow, what's that? Shueqiu ran over and plucked a fruit from the tree. He took a bite and it tasted good. But soon, Shueqiu's attention was attracted by another tree. It was an umbrella-shaped tree with drooping branches that looked like a bell jar. What attracted Shueqiu's attention wasn't the tree's appearance, but the watermelon-sized oval balls hanging from its drooping branches. Shueqiu walked over and sniffed, then opened his mouth and bit the top of the oval ball. A moment later, some juice flowed out, and Shueqiu licked it. It was sweet and tasted good, better than fruit. So, Shueqiu stuck his mouth to the top of the oval ball and started sucking on it. The full oval ball slowly deflated. Hey, what are you sucking on? Hui Mao asked. Shueqiu snorted twice but didn't answer. Instead, he switched to another oval ball and continued sucking on the juice. Hui Mao jumped onto a branch and copied Shueqiu's action. He bit the top of the oval ball and licked the juice that flowed out. Then, the Miantuan and Qifeng joined in the fun. On the other side of the screen, Sigma was frustrated. It walked around the room and protested loudly. In the end, it announced, "Bring that tree back." How? After licking one, Hui Mao wiped his face with his paw. He completely agreed to bring the tree back, but he couldn't be bothered to care for it. Bring some back. We must bring some back. I'll plant them in a small garden. Sigma clapped his hands excitedly. Yeah, little Loveag jumped on Sigma's arm in agreement. In the end, the little guys discussed among themselves and shouted, "Silan, Silan mourned for them." This was fate. Silan walked over to take a look at the tree. The juice inside the oval fruit was very nutritious, and some of the plant oils were very rare nutrients for humans. But for some of the plants that grew in this area, they were something that would cause them to retreat at the mere mention of it. These oval-shaped spheres were equivalent to the plant's fluid sacs. The fluid sacs contained a lot of plant oils that carried a sweet fragrance. The smell of the plant oils was hated by many plants, and they would retreat the moment they smelled it. But Wheeze and the others liked it very much, and so did humans. After the inspection was over, Silan asked Cheto to take care of the plants. Silan wasn't counting on the gluttons to do it. Even if they destroyed the entire forest, they might not be able to dig out a whole plant, not to mention that most of the plants needed to be treated for nutrients. The plants with the oval fluid reservoir belonged to the viviparous type of plant. In most plants, after a seed matured, it would usually leave the mother's body and spread out. After a period of dormancy, it would wait for a suitable temperature, humidity, and other conditions before it would germinate in the soil and gradually grow into a young plant. However, due to the complexity of the natural environment, plants had a diversity of characteristics that allowed them to better adapt to the environment and survive. Therefore, there were some angiosperms that developed like a mammal's fetus inside its mother's body. Instead of leaving its mother's body immediately after the seed matured, it would germinate inside the fruit and grow into a seedling before leaving its mother's body. That was why people called them viviparous plants. The plant's branches covered the ground like a cover, and there were many lanterns inside the cover. In fact, they were seedlings that had sprouted from the seed. Once the seed matured, it would germinate inside the fruit without leaving its mother's body. The hypocotyl would stretch out and protrude out of the fruit's skin, forming many club-shaped seedlings. If one broke the membrane outside the lantern, they would see the seedlings that had yet to leave their mother's body. Therefore, Chetto didn't need to prune the mother's body or dig out the entire tree. All he needed to do was collect some lanterns. Other than this plant, there were a lot of other plants that Sigma wanted them to bring back and plant in its botanical garden. Sillin agreed to all of Sigma's requests. After all, Sigma was the one who contributed the entire base to them, so Sillin naturally wouldn't turn down a small request that would benefit everyone. After Sillin and Chetto were done processing the plants, he left the rest to Chetto. While collecting information, Chetto dug out the plants that Hui Mao and the others had chosen, treated them with nutrient solution and sealed them with a special membrane. Tico and Lycrabe would mark the plants that needed to be transplanted, and Chetto would go and collect the best materials later. While Sillin, Tico, and Lycrabe were processing some useful plants, Yudos and Carrie had come over from the mining area. Seeing that Sillin and the others weren't wearing protective suits, Carrie and Yudos also took off their protective suits. Carrie sucked in a breath and sighed. The air here isn't bad. Yudos looked at the detector in his hand and said, "Yeah, the air here is a lot better than the other side." "Hey, Shuecho, eat less. You'll have diarrhea." Shuecho was eating like a ball right now. Even Yudos was worried that he might be overweight. Hearing Yudos shout, Sigma asked in puzzlement, "What's diarrhea?" "Ahem, it's when you can't control your bowel movements," Yudos explained. Sillin and Carrie turned their heads away and pretended that they didn't hear anything. Yudos noticed that Hui Mao, Qifeng, and Shuecho were all looking at him, and he obviously felt a little embarrassed. He rubbed his nose and said, "Hey, you guys should hurry up. We'll be leaving once the energy ores are all mined. Judging from your speed, there's still a lot of places you haven't visited yet, right? It's rare for us to come out, so let's enjoy ourselves." These words undoubtedly resonated with Hui Mao and the others. Instead of worrying about why they couldn't control their bowel movements, they turned around and went to look for more exotic plants. Carrie went over to watch Tico and Lycrabe process medicinal plants. He learned a little himself. However, Yudos only watched for a while before his attention was drawn to a beautiful plant. The plant wasn't tall. It was less than 2 meters tall, and there was a feather-like thing growing at the top. When the wind blew, it looked like a peacock spreading its tail. It was a beautiful sight, and it also carried a sweet fragrance. "It's so beautiful." Yudos couldn't help but take out his recording device and record the scene. While Sillin was dealing with a plant, the vines that had curled up because of his arrival suddenly grew excited. The vine stretched out with a whoosh and swiftly extended towards a certain direction, and that direction was exactly where Yudos was standing. At the same time, the vines around Lycrabe and the others also began to become excited, and at the same time, they quickly extended towards Yudos. "Yudos, be careful." Sillin quickly ran over and used his wrist blade to cut off the vines that extended towards him. When the vines behind him reached forward, he took out a bottle of spray and sprayed it on Yudos' arm. Carrie and Lycrabe also rushed over to help, cutting down the vines that extended from all directions. They didn't dare to use flames or ultra-low temperature freezing guns on their own. The surrounding environment was unstable, and the external image could easily change the environment here. The safest way was to use knives to cut down the vines. When Sillin put a protective mask on Yudos, Yudos was still a little confused. Why? He was going to go up and cut the vines, but now he was treated like an injured person by Sillin. He was not injured. Huh? Yudos looked at his arm. There were many bloodstains on it, and the blood was still dripping down. Silen sprayed him with a compound spray to cover the wound so that the blood would stop flowing. After wiping the blood, he threw the absorbent paper in his hand far away and pulled Yudos away from the place. After running for 50 meters, Yudos looked at the original place again. The vines had covered the place, and the place where the blood-stained absorbent paper fell was also the gathering point of the vines. Obviously, these vines were attracted to Yudos' blood. Don't get hurt. Once you bleed, it will cause a series of movements. After all, Carrie had experienced a lot of things. When he saw this scene, he could roughly infer the reason for the reaction of these plants and the various possible situations that might occur. Fortunately, Yudos was the only one injured. If everyone was injured, everyone would have to deal with the vines all over the place, and there would be no time to stop the bleeding and clean up the blood on the wound. Looking at the fine saw teeth on the vines because of excitement, the situation might get worse. Yudos panted. After putting on the protective mask, he gradually felt the pain in his arm. What happened? I didn't even notice that my arm was cut just now. Yudos was very puzzled. Wasn't it just taking a photo? How could he be cut without feeling anything, and there was more than one wound? There was a lot of blood. Lycrabe released a floating measuring device. The measuring device circled around and came back with some data. The gas released by the plant contains a lot of nitrous oxide, and a few other auxiliary gases that affect the nerves but will not cause fainting or death. After inhaling this gas mixture, the body will lose the sense of pain, but the body will still be awake. The addition of the auxiliary gas will not affect the body's movement, so Yudos did not notice it at all, Lycrabe explained. Nitrous oxide inhibited the release of excitatory neurotransmitters and the conduction of nerve impulses in the central nervous system, so Yudos did not feel anything when he was cut by the plant and bled. Yudos took a deep breath. He was so bold because he saw that Silen and the rest were not wearing protective suits, and nothing happened. It seemed that he still had to be cautious. As a hunter, Yudos still had a lot to learn. Vigilance was not something that could be cultivated through words. Although he had experienced this incident, Yudos was obviously not frightened. Instead, he was interested. He wore a protective mask and held a measuring device in his hand, looking for similar plants everywhere. Silen did not care about him. This was also a kind of training, and it was good to accumulate more experience. Moving forward, there was a lake. There were some microscopic algae in the lake, but there were no fish or any other aquatic animals. There were only countless unknown names of plants ranging from small to large. On the other side of the lake, there was a very tall tree. It was like a giant looking down at the creatures on the ground. Compared to it, Silen was as small as an ant. Silen walked over and looked around the giant tree. Finally, he came to the conclusion that this giant tree was at the top of the food chain in this area. However, there were not many of these giant trees. It was a strategy formed during the evolution of creatures to respond to the environment, and it was also the rule of nature. Silen found a giant substance in this giant tree, and this giant substance made the tree grow bigger and bigger. After collecting some of the primitive substances, Silen looked at the horizon. Night was coming. In the forest, the night was full of danger. There would be all kinds of wild beasts, but there were no wild beasts here. What would the night be like? Although the light receded and dusk came. At night, the most obvious thing was the row of trees not far away. The branches of those trees stretched outwards, and there was a big flower on each branch. The flower was about 20 centimeters in diameter, and it looked quite ordinary during the day. During the day, this kind of inconspicuous green flower would not attract too much attention in this colorful world. However, when night came, it would gradually emit a white light. The darker the night, the brighter the light. The plants that were attracted to the light would slowly move over, and the vines would also move over. The other branches on the tree would firmly capture these plants that were moved into the trap, cutting off the connection between them and the main body, and finally becoming fertilizer for the growth of the main body. This was the strategy of the plants, the survival technique. Because the composition of the air would change at night, Scylla and the others wore protective clothing and masks to be safe. After the glowing plants were full, the light would be dimmed or directly extinguished to save their own energy. The night here was not long, but it was enough for some nocturnal plants to have a full meal. Most of the plants were asleep. During the day and night, the plants carried out photosynthesis, respiration, movement, and sleep. In the forest where there were no insects, there was only the fleeting sound of hunting that belonged to the plants. At night, Scylla and the others saw the predation of the nocturnal plants, and saw the changes in the composition of the air in this area. It was no wonder that there were no animals in this area. In such a gas environment, many animals could not survive. This was a world that belonged to the plants. When there were no outsiders, they were the rulers of this area. The residents fought openly and secretly in the way of plants, and they multiplied. In the morning, when a ray of light shone on the plant area, there was a muffled thumping sound. It was a tree as thick as 5 people. The tree was very tall, but of course, it could not be compared to the giant tree. There was a big bell-shaped flower at the top of this tree, and the sound came from the flower above. After coming into contact with the natural light, these bell-shaped flowers began to sway, and then let out a distant sound, announcing the end of the night and the beginning of the day. After the bell-shaped flowers rang, some of the flowers that closed at night gradually bloomed, and the sleeping plants gradually woke up. Perhaps they were also thinking about hunting the next target. Scylla and the others looked at the light from the sky and continued to do what they had unfinished. A new day had begun. Chapter 2:11. By the time he received the notification that the mining operation was complete, Scylla's side was almost done with his work. The transport car had transported the seeds Cheto had prepared and the raw materials Lycrabe and the others had chosen to the spaceplane. Hui Mao and the others were also eating until they were full. They were all very satisfied with their harvest. Let's go. We can come back if we need anything. Scylla gathered everyone and returned to the mining site. After a quick inspection, everyone boarded the spaceplane and returned to the starship parked outside the planet. Then, they began their return journey. Every squad's operation time was different. When Scylla and the others returned, there were still 3 squads mining energy and metal ores outside. How's the harvest? Shoten asked Scylla while looking at a group of people unloading cargo not far away. Celine smiled. It was obvious that she was quite satisfied with the rewards of this voyage. Not bad. We didn't find any good metal ores, but the energy ores are passable. More importantly, we managed to transplant some of the more important plants to the planet. We'll be able to save a lot of raw materials, and the potency and quality of the medicine won't be too bad. The specific situation of that planet had already been submitted to the technical team. The technical team of the 6th B Squadron would combine the information collected by the various squads and perfect the star map. Every once in a while, they would report it to the relevant personnel of the A Squadron so that the star map of the Vanguard's area would be more detailed and convenient for their future operations. Scylla and Shoten chatted for a bit before arriving at Sigma's little garden. In the past, Sigma had only planted a few low-grade native plants in this small garden. Although the area was quite large, there wasn't much substance to it. Sigma had only come up with the idea after watching some of the old media videos stored in the base. However, after putting it into practice, he discovered that there weren't many species to be planted. There were only large patches of weeds, unlike the colorful gardens in the videos. Sigma had no idea what to plant in this small garden. This time, however, Sigma's little garden was more than fulfilling. Previously, he had stored some of the fish eggs sealed in the starship's aquarium and given them to Sigma to keep in its little garden. Now that he had transplanted these trees, Sigma believed that it wouldn't be long before the little garden became a sight to behold. Right now, Weez and the others were spending almost all of their time in Sigma's little garden coming up with random ideas. They had very little experience in planting, so all they could do was spout nonsense. The good news was that Sigma had done some research in this area, and Cheto was there to help stabilize their morale. More than 90% of the transplanted trees had survived. There were still a few eggs in Sigma's garden. They were Lovag's eggs. The Lovag guardian beast had entered a breeding season, but Sigma was in charge of incubating its eggs. Right now, the little garden's environment was perfect for incubation, so there was no need for special equipment to control the temperature and humidity of the eggs. A few days later, 6 or 7 second-generation Lovags had hatched. The Lovags were omnivores. According to Sigma, they ate a wide variety of foods and were very resistant to hunger. The newborn Lovags, however, weren't as resistant to hunger. Since there wasn't any extra meat, they had no choice but to eat vegetables and feed them nutrient drinks to replenish the nutrients they needed to grow. The first generation of Lovag beasts had definitely eaten meat before, and most of them were probably humans. This was Silen's judgment. When he first came to this place and encountered the Lovag beasts looked at him like they were looking at a familiar prey. These little fellows who had just been born not too long ago looked at people with very kind eyes. Perhaps the chip that replaced their brains had an executive program like that, but they had never killed or eaten meat before. He couldn't bring these little fellows along when he went out to mine, so Silen was wondering when he should catch some bugs for these little fellows to eat. Silen didn't go looking for the worm. Not long after he made up his mind, something happened on the planet before he could carry out his next operation. On this day, Shotun looked at the situation of the operations of the various squads in his hands. He wanted to make a summary because in a few days, the A Squadron would send someone over to check on the development of the B Squadrons and reward the best with resources. Shotun was engrossed in reading when he suddenly received an urgent notification from a team member. "Commander, there's a spaceplane flying toward us. We didn't get a reply to the warning we sent. All we got was a continuous distress signal. What should we do?" Normally, an unknown flying object would be warned first, and if the warning didn't work, they would shoot. However, the spaceplane kept sending distress signals, and no one responded to the 6th Division's communication link. "Are there any signs of life on it?" Shotun asked. "There are signs of life on it, but they're not obvious. They're almost completely still, so we can't get any other information." "No results from scanning the spaceplane?" "No, at least there are no parasites or viruses on the outside of the spaceplane," the team member replied. Shotun thought for a moment and asked, "How long until it arrives?" "About 5 minutes. Based on the spaceplane's flight trajectory, it will be outside the base's range when it reaches our planet. The coordinates are." The team member reported some of the analyzed data to Shotun. "Pay close attention." Shotun's intention was to let the spaceplane land, but they had to be on guard. Whether the spaceplane was a threat or not, they had to treat it as a threat and not fight a battle unprepared. "Yes, Commander." After the report was done, the team member began to do the follow-up work. His voice sounded more excited, and it was obvious that he was looking forward to a target to vent his boredom during this period of time. After ending the communication with the team member, Shotun connected to another communicator. "Attention all squads. Attention all squads. An unidentified spaceplane is about to arrive on this planet," Shotun informed everyone in the base of the situation. Everyone knew what to do next. Some of the people who were sleeping got up, grabbed their weapons and ran out excitedly to meet up with their team members. Silen was observing the growth of the trees in Sigma's little garden. Some of the trees had already begun to bear fruit. When he heard Shotun's notification, he put down the fruit in his hand and walked out. The blue bar on Sigma's face flashed, and it quickly understood the situation through the base's reconnaissance device. But today was different. It didn't need to do anything. The 6th Division would make their move, so Sigma was very curious about what they were going to do. He ordered the little Lovag on his arm to jump to the ground and left the little garden. Once everyone was gathered and assigned, there was no need for detailed instructions. This kind of cooperation had been done many times before. "Alright, that's it. Let's move out. Pay attention to your defenses. As soon as Celine finished speaking, the group of people eagerly grabbed their weapons and armed themselves to the teeth and left. What's wrong, Tico? Celine asked when he saw Tico standing there with a frown on her face. Something's wrong. Tico pointed at the rabbit nestled in her coat pocket with her chin. Right now, the rabbit's ears were drooping and its head was buried as if it was trying to hide from something. After checking the rabbit's status, Celine turned on the communicator. Attention, everyone. Level 1 alert. Level 1 alert. The cheerful Carrie and the others immediately turned serious. Celine wouldn't casually say Level 1 alert. If he did, then it had to be a very dangerous target. After receiving Celine's message, Shotten asked Celine how he came up with the conclusion. Celine only said that it was a hunch. Although he didn't know why Celine said that, Shotten still ordered the squad to be on Level 1 alert. It was too late to destroy the spaceplane. Destroying it would affect the satellites orbiting the planet, and if it got too close, it could affect the planet's B-class livable environment. They could only go on Level 1 alert. Level 1 alert? Are you kidding me? Didn't you say it was a spaceplane the size of a fart? Is it that dangerous? Some of the team members complained. After all, Level 1 alert was not a joke. At this time, the spaceplane had already passed through the atmosphere and was falling somewhere not far from the base. The people on the ground were already waiting not far from the estimated landing point. In the air, there were people piloting the fighter jet. Although Yudo's hands were sweaty, his control was still stable. Level 1 alert. Boom! The spaceplane crashed into the ground, creating a deep crater. The spaceplane was also largely damaged. Some of the team members wanted to rush up to take a look, but they were stopped. If it wasn't for Level 1 alert, they would have definitely gone up to take a look. But now, they couldn't. Creak. Creak. The sound of the hatch opening was heard. Through the images from the satellites in space and the monitors floating around the crater, everyone saw that there were 8 holes on the top of the spaceplane. It wasn't the hatch they had imagined. There was no logo on the spaceplane. There was no representative stamp or serial number, so they didn't know who was on the spaceplane. The spaceplane was still sending out a distress signal, but no one was in the mood to save anyone right now. As hunters, they had been through too much, and they wouldn't lower their guard just because someone was asking for help. Whoosh 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 whoosh. 8 cylinders were ejected from the spaceplane and flew in different directions. Each cylinder could only hold 1 human. Half of the cylinders were transparent, and through the transparent wall, they could see that the spaceplane was filled with humans. There were men and women, young and old, but they all looked like ordinary people. They looked like ordinary humans. 8 more cylinders flew out before the first one even hit the ground. Round after round of cylinders were ejected. Some landed directly on the ground, while others opened their parachutes in the air. However, based on their speed of descent, it would take at least 2 minutes for them to reach the ground. They were the targets of the fighter jets. Lying on Sigma's back, Shueisha suddenly felt uneasy and angry. It was a familiar yet annoying feeling, and it couldn't help but feel the urge to rush up and start killing. Aside from Shueisha, Qifeng felt the same way. A threatening growl escaped from his throat. Noticing the 2 fellows' reactions, Celine signaled everyone with his eyes to be on high alert. The cylinder closest to Celine's group stood upright. Through the transparent wall, they could see a woman in her 20s inside. She wore a knee-length skirt, had fair skin, and had a nice figure. Her eyes were closed, and her long eyelashes made people want to caress them. One of the team members gulped. Holy shit, it really is a murder weapon. There were a few more cylinders like this one around them. There were at least 10 of them in front of each team, and there were even more farther away. Some of the cylinders were filled with cute children, just like the first time Celine met Tang Qiuqiu. They had pink cheeks, and they looked innocent even with their eyes closed. The uneasiness in Silen's heart grew stronger as he thought of something. The doors of the cylinders were obviously reinforced. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been damaged even if they fell to the ground. The moment the cabin door opened, Silen fired multiple shots, and the people inside the cabin were all shot in the forehead. The woman was one of them. Everyone was wondering why Silen acted so quickly. Wasn't he being too impulsive? However, the next moment, everyone felt their hair stand on end. Although the people who were shot by Silen's glabella were bleeding, the rate of blood loss wasn't as fast as a normal person who was shot. Only a tiny bit of blood flowed out of their wounds, and none of them had fallen to the ground. What the hell is going on? Before Carrie could finish, the people opened their eyes almost at the same time. Their eyes were blank and unfocused. Everyone felt a chill hit them in the face, and they started firing without hesitation. But while they were firing, the people inside the cylinders began to change. Their bodies began to grow taller and swell. Before the blood on their cracked skin could flow down, they were covered by new skin. The new skin was pale and bloodless. The beautiful woman had become as hideous as a monster. The meridians all over her body wriggled rapidly, and her fair arms were mixed with more and more pale and blood. They quickly thickened, and her slender fingers became like the claws of an eagle. There were even lines on them. The splattered flesh and blood did not affect the people's mutation. Instead, it seemed to have stimulated the blood of these monsters. They let out terrifying roars and rushed towards Silen's group. Every step they took made Silen and the others tremble. Although these mutated monsters were huge, their movements were quite fast and they could dodge the shots. This was still a planet on the ground. After the cylinders in the air opened up, the people who walked out of them also began to mutate during the landing process. Bat-like wings spread out on their backs, but they were not like the membranes of bats. Their wings were thicker, and every flap could quickly change the airflow, allowing them to fly in the air flexibly and avoid the attacks of the fighter jets. Yudos controlled the fighter jet to attack one of the monsters. These monsters were very agile and had a high sense of danger, so it was difficult to lock onto them. Their long claws easily left deep marks on the fighter jet, so while attacking, they had to control their close contact with these monsters. One of the fighter jet's wing was wrapped by the long tongue of a monster. The saliva on the monster's tongue was highly corrosive, and it corroded the wing. If Yudos had not cut off the long tongue in time, 1/3 of the fighter jet's wing would have been destroyed, and its flight would have been affected. If that had happened, they would have been in danger. The monster that had its tongue severed by Yudos opened its mouth and screamed. The severed tongue was rapidly recovering, but when the monster swung its tongue, its saliva splattered onto a fighter that happened to be flying past, and 2 holes were corroded into the wing of the fighter. The situation in the air was more difficult, and the situation on the ground was not easy either. These biohumans had obviously undergone biochemical modification, and even if their heads were cut off, they would not die. This undoubtedly made the situation even more difficult for the team. This guy was simply a human-shaped weapon. This was definitely a premeditated incident. Silen took out something that looked like a bow. An energy stone the size of a child's fist was installed on it. He aimed it at the monster at the front and pressed the button. Whoosh! An arc of light shot straight at the monster, cutting it vertically in half. The strange thing was, the monster that was cut in half did not bleed much. The green blood mixed with the blood seemed to have solidified, sticking tightly to the piece of meat. What was even more shocking was that the monster that was cut in half began to change. The cut began to heal, and then grew, until it became a complete body. In other words, the person that was cut in half was like some kind of animal that grew into 2 independent bodies. It was useless. It was useless even if it was cut in half. What was going on? Carrie raised his cannon and tried to blast them to smithereens, but these monsters' super high foresight didn't give him a chance to aim at all. As soon as Carrie's cannon moved over, the monsters dodged out of the way. Fuck, damn it, this is too fast. Carrie could not help but curse after his first blast missed the monster. Vice Captain, "What do we do now?" someone asked. They had already taken out their lightsabers. Of course, they were not afraid of a direct melee. However, after seeing the scene of one turning into two, everyone was a little hesitant. If they were split into 5 pieces, would one turn into 5? No one could say for sure. Therefore, they were now in a predicament that they did not know what to do. Scylla had not been in contact with these guys for long. He did not have the time to analyze why these guys had such insane abilities. Do I have to grind them into mud? As soon as Scylla thought that, a long scream came from the base. Yeah, the scream this time was much louder than the one Scylla had encountered. It was so piercing that it felt like his eardrums were going to burst. The people from the 6th Division were not the most angry when these modified humans barged into the base, but the Lovag guardian beasts. Their mission was to protect the base on this planet, and these new monsters had undoubtedly crossed the line. Yeah, there was another sharp whistle. The Lovag beasts rushed over one after another. There were some on the ground and in the air. Behind them, some of the younger Lovag beasts followed the adult Lovag beasts, waving their pincers excitedly. Chapter 212. Retreat. Everyone, retreat. Scylla and the Queen retreated a certain distance away and left the battlefield to the charging Lovags. If they continued to stay here, they would definitely be accidentally injured by the excited Lovags. Scylla estimated the number of Lovags. The ratio of adult Lovags to the mutated humans was close to 2 to 1. About 2 Lovags were fighting against 1 mutated human. In terms of body size, the mutated humans were stronger than the Lovags. However, no one could say for sure since they had never seen the Lovag's true combat power. Scylla never knew why the Lovags had so many pincers, and all of them were huge. Most of the animals that Scylla had seen only had 1 pair of pincers. Therefore, when he first saw these fellows, he felt that it was strange, but he could not explain why. Now, Scylla finally knew why the Lovags had so many pincers. The charging Lovags did not bare their fangs and claws like the insect beasts that Scylla had seen before. Instead, when they got close to the mutated humans, they suddenly moved their 3 pairs of pincers. The joints on the pincers twisted in a strange way, forming a circular shield. Bang! The mutated humans were sent flying as if they had been hit by an armored vehicle. Outside the battlefield, Celine and the others were a little stunned when they saw this scene. Is this their battle strategy? Carrie gulped. If they were hit like that, they would probably fall apart. After sending the mutated humans flying, the Lovags did not stop. Instead, they continued to charge forward. They knew that their enemies would not be so weak. The mutated humans stood up after landing on the ground. Their twisted bodies wriggled and quickly recovered. They seemed to have been angered by the Lovags. They roared and charged at the Lovags, sharp bones growing out of their fingers. However, they were smarter this time. They did not charge forward directly. Instead, when they were about to hit the round shield made of pincers, they suddenly jumped up and attacked from above. Against the mutants' attack, the Lovaga beast's reaction was fast. Scylla saw one of the Lovags detach a pincer leg from its round shield and quickly clamped onto the mutant's arm. Then, it slammed the mutant's arm onto the ground. Pa pa pa. It was like slapping a fish. Carrie and the others were stunned again. Looking at the Lovag beast's actions, it seemed like it was a piece of cake for it to grab a mutant of this size and smash it into the ground. It was hard to tell that the Lovag beast was so strong. Just like ants, they looked like they didn't have much meat, but they could lift things that were 400 times their own weight and drag things that were 1,700 times their own weight. And this was just an ordinary ant. After being modified, the ant would be several times stronger. Scylla suspected that the Lovags had a gene that gave them a similar ability. Scylla and the others watched the battle unfold. The attack power of the Lovag beasts could not be underestimated. No matter how they looked at it, the love egg beasts had the upper hand. Not to mention, they also had the advantage in numbers. If a love egg beast's pincer leg was forcefully torn off by the mutant, it would quickly grow a new one. Similarly, if a mutant's hand was chopped off, it would quickly grow a new one. Monsters against monsters. They are indeed a perfect match. Carrie sighed. Hey, why don't we make a bet on how long these love egg guardian beasts will take to deal with these mutants? Xiao Shang rested his gun on his shoulder and looked at Carrie. Sure. Carrie looked at the situation on the battlefield and raised 2 fingers. 20 minutes. I bet that they will be able to deal with these problems in 20 minutes. Xiao Shang shook his head and raised 3 fingers. 20 minutes is too short. These mutants' recovery ability is too strong. I think they will need at least 30 minutes. They definitely won't be able to deal with them in 20 minutes. Carrie looked at Silen. Hey, Vice Captain, do you want to join in? Silen did not immediately reply to Carrie. Instead, he turned around and took out the ultra-low temperature cold beam freeze gun from a box. What are you doing with that? Carrie asked curiously. Something's not right. Silen pointed in a direction. There was a mutant that had just been chopped into 3 parts by the love egg beast. The mutant was sliced into 3 parts, the top of the shoulder, the torso, and the bottom of the waist. However, the moment the Lovaga beast shifted its target, the muscles of the mutant that had been sliced into 3 parts immediately began to contract. A portion of the muscles rapidly dissolved and formed new cells. Some of the cells in the blood also quickly gathered on the cut surface, forming a special callus. Then, under the watchful eyes of Carrie and the others, the 3 parts formed 3 new independent bodies. Each of the independent bodies was exactly the same as the mutant that had been chopped into 2. This scene repeated itself. However, a few minutes ago, Silen had chopped the mutant into 2, and this mutant had been chopped into 3 parts. Carrie and Xiao Shang retracted their previous thoughts. If each mutant that was chopped into several pieces could become independent clones, how were they supposed to fight this war? Did they really have to blast them into smithereens? Silen picked up the freeze gun and selected a mutant. He fired a cold beam at it. The body of the mutant that was fighting against the Lovaga beast quickly froze. However, it did not turn into a block of ice like an ordinary human. These mutants could still move, but their movements were much slower. Every movement would shake off the ice that had formed on their bodies. The only thing that was frozen was their skin. The ice that fell off was their outer skin. When the outer skin fell off, the mutants' movements would return to their original state. Imagine how painful it would be for an ordinary person to have their skin peeled off inch by inch. However, these mutants did not seem to feel the pain at all. Their eyes were only filled with killing intent and numbness. Regardless of whether these mutants felt pain or not, this was not Silen's goal. For the love egg beast, it was their habit to first take down their enemies, kill them, and then turn around to eat them. The killed enemies would be eaten by the baby love egg beasts. This time, they had planned to cut the invaders into pieces and feed the baby love egg beasts that had just been born. Who would have thought that the invaders that had been cut into pieces would come back to life? The love egg beast's anger increased again. The mutant that was hit by the cold beam suddenly slowed down and was cut into 10 pieces by the furious love egg beast. However, the same thing happened again. These pieces of meat started to change again. However, the time it took for them to become whole was longer than the time they were cut into 2 or 3 pieces. Silen raised his freeze gun again and fired a few shots at the same mutant. The mutant that was hit by the cold beam had slowed down considerably. Before the mutant was hit by the cold beam, it was about to jump away from the love egg beast's round shield. However, it was shot by Silen before it could jump. Pack! The frozen mutant that was hit head-on was smashed into palm-sized chunks of flesh. Callie and the rest could not help but shiver when they saw this. The bloody pieces were stepped on by the mutants and love egg beasts, and in the end, they were almost turned into meat paste. In this state, he probably won't. Before Carrie could finish his sentence, a few protrusions appeared on the meat paste. The protrusions grew bigger and bigger, and the guard's meat paste slowly disappeared. Fuck, what the hell are those things? Carrie cursed. Yudi looked at the time. It's been 10 minutes, and the number of mutants has increased by several times. The Lovag beasts are at a disadvantage now. Although the number of clones has increased, the strength of each new clone has decreased compared to their mother, Celine said. How could this happen? It's because of the cell's versatility. The cells in the mutants are always in a highly stimulated state. When a mutant is completely destroyed, the best cell will be selected from the isolated body to differentiate. The other cells will provide the cell with nutrients and energy. Therefore, the clones that are cut into less pieces will be stronger than the clones that are cut into more pieces. This is because these clones absorb more energy when they differentiate. Just as Celine said, these mutants did not necessarily realize this flaw. Instead, they instinctively began to absorb the pieces of their own kind that were cut into pieces and assimilate them into themselves. Then what should we do? Carrie scratched his head in frustration. He had no idea where to start. Moreover, the mutants and the Lovag beasts were fighting each other, and it was getting more and more intense. The smaller Lovag beasts did not approach them on their own. They only moved around the periphery. Before the pieces of the mutants were fully formed, the smaller Lovag beasts would rush over and take a few bites. However, due to the gluttony of the smaller Lovag beasts, some of the pieces were completely devoured by the smaller Lovag beasts before they fully formed. This way, there were fewer cloned mutants. When Snowball saw this scene from afar, it turned its head to glance at Celine, Tang Qiuqiu, and the others. Seeing that none of them were paying attention to it, Snowball charged towards them with a whoosh and bit down on a mutated human that was still in the process of dividing at the periphery of the battlefield. Qiuqiu, hurry up and come back. Tang Qiuqiu said anxiously. No matter how strong Qiuqiu's adult form was, Qiuqiu was still a juvenile. His ability and temperament were not mature yet. If he was accidentally injured by the Lovag beasts or stabbed by the mutant's claws, it would be enough to make him suffer. Qiuqiu was just a glutton. When he saw the smaller Lovag beasts eating, he was just a little jealous. He still had some self-awareness and was a little afraid of death. After rushing over and taking a bite, he quickly ran back, chewing the meat in his mouth as he ran. Carrie and the others were speechless. Fatty, no matter what, you still have human meat in your mouth. It doesn't matter if he is a mutant or not, he is still a human. How dare you eat human meat in front of us? As soon as Qiuqiu returned, Tang Qiuqiu grabbed his ear. Tang Qiuqiu picked up the gun and started hitting Qiuqiu's fat butt. Diaz had said that disobedient children should be spanked. However, this white fatty did not seem to care about Tang Qiuqiu's beating. Moreover, he was not afraid of pain. With Tang Qiuqiu's strength, he could not even pull a hair off his body. Qiuqiu took the initiative to let Tang Qiuqiu hit his butt while chewing the meat in his mouth in satisfaction. How does it taste? Hui Mao asked with blinking eyes. It seemed that as long as Qiuqiu said, good, he would also go and eat it. Oh, crunch. After chewing and swallowing the meat, Qiuqiu grinned and said, not bad. Whis immediately ran towards the direction of the carcass and started eating. Qiuqiu looked at Hui Mao's back and looked at Tang Qiuqiu pitifully. However, Tang Qiuqiu's hand that was grabbing his ear did not loosen at all. Acting pitiful was useless. Just as Qiuqiu looked at Tang Qiuqiu with a wronged expression, Celine walked over. Qiuqiu was not afraid of Tang Qiuqiu, Carrie, or Shotten, but it was afraid of Celine. It couldn't tell why. Usually, it could play with Celine, but once it made a mistake, it didn't dare to face Celine. So when Celine walked over, Qiuqiu's body stiffened and its round head drooped down. Celine squatted down and looked at Qiuqiu. Qiuqiu tilted its head to the side. Celine raised his hand and turned Qiuqiu's head to face him. Shueqio's eyes tilted to the side, but it didn't want to meet Silen's eyes. Shing! The wrist knife in Silen's hand popped out. Hearing this sound, Shueqio shivered and raised its fat hand to hold its head. I was wrong, I shouldn't have been greedy, I didn't say that. Silen grabbed Shueqio's face. Since he was with Mo Heng, he had developed this bad habit of grabbing other people's faces. Be good, lick it. Shueqio blinked, not understanding Silen's meaning. Silen waved the wrist knife in his hand and pointed at Shueqio's tongue. Lick the knife once, and it's best if you spray more saliva. Didn't I see you spitting saliva at the Miantuan last time? Just spray more saliva on the knife. The Miantuan, who was gloating on Yudi's shoulder, shook its tail and turned its head away, not daring to look at Yudi. How did he find out about such a stupid thing? Being stared at by Silen, Shueqio pitifully spat saliva at Silen's knife. Every time he spat, he would tremble. Looking at Silen's expression, if Silen showed any signs of anger, he would be ready to roll away with his head in his hands. However, it seemed that Silen really wasn't angry. So the fat man spat more and more energetically. The others didn't understand why Silen was doing this, but when Yudi pointed at the mutated human that Shueqio had bitten, they gradually understood. The mutated human that Shueqio had bitten had yet to fully form, especially the place where Shueqio had bitten, there was still a bite mark. Even if half of these mutated humans were chopped off, they would quickly split into a new body. Why would there be a bite mark? And from the looks of it, there was no sign of it recovering. The reason why this split body remained this way was because of Shueqio. Silen had seen the mutated humans that Hui Mao had bitten. Although there were signs of suppression, it wasn't as obvious as Shueqio's. Shueqio didn't have a venom sac like snakes, which meant that the suppressor should be in Shueqio's saliva. That was why Silen did something that made Shueqio spit at him. After his wrist knife was stained with Shueqio's saliva, Silen tidied up his equipment and rushed forward alone. With lightning speed, he slashed a mutated human that was fighting with the Lovaga beast in half. Then, he quickly retreated, not wanting to continue fighting. Everyone observed the mutant that Silen had cut into two. Unlike the mutant that had been cut into two at the beginning of the battle, this mutant did not begin to divide and recover immediately. The two halves of the mutant trembled, and no callous cells formed at the incision. Instead, the greenish blood that seemed to have solidified and stuck tightly to the flesh gradually melted and flowed out. Carrie and the others' mouths turned into an O shape. They all turned their heads to look at Snowball, a group of shining eyes. Shueqio shrunk into Tang Qiuqiu's arms again and again. Carrie turned around, grabbed his great sword, and ran to Shueqio. Come, Shueqio. Spit it out for Big Brother. After Silen confirmed the effectiveness of his attacks, he retreated and said to the spectating Sigma, tell the Lovags to share some of the mutants with us later. They'll be responsible for covering for us and eating. It's best if they can finish the food fast. Everyone knew that Sigma could communicate with the Lovaga beasts. Not to mention that he was the one who implanted the chips into them. Therefore, Sigma was in charge of negotiating with the Lovaga beasts. After Silen briefly explained the situation to Sigma, Sigma promised to complete the mission. Are you ready? Silen asked Carrie and the others. Yes. Lycrabe has already taken a sample of his saliva and brought it back for research. I'm sure we'll get the results soon. The weapons in the hands of Callie and the others were all stained with Shueqio's saliva. In order to spit on their weapons, Shueqio's mouth was dry and he had to drink a lot of water. That's good. Celine made a hand gesture, signaling the start of the operation. After holding back for so long, Carrie and the others charged toward the battlefield. Silen looked at the situation. As long as he could slow down the cloning speed of the mutants, the Lovaga beasts would devour them before they could complete their cloning. So, after solving this problem, Silen decided to investigate another matter. The incident this time was obviously premeditated. Those mutants were specially developed humanoid weapons, and that spaceplane was flying towards the planet where the 6th B Squadron was stationed. However, Celine needed to find out which side had sent the assassins over. The mastermind would definitely try to cover up and erase all traces, but Celine still had to look for it. If he was right, the spaceplane would no longer exist after all the mutants were killed, and it would be even more difficult to find any clues by then. Celine approached the spacecraft and quickly weaved between the mutants and the Lovaga beasts. It was hard to see his figure. The holes on the spacecraft that popped out of the cylindrical cabin were already closed. There was no gap for him to enter. After Celine circled the spacecraft, he called Hui Mao, who was happily chewing on the mutants, over. What? Hui Mao smirked and licked his paws in front of Celine. Try to open the cabin door. Be careful not to let the system inside detect any signs of intrusion. Hui Mao paced back and forth, then squatted down in a corner of the spacecraft. Strings of characters flashed in his eyes. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.